My family flew across 9 states to attend my sister's gender reveal party. When I got married, not a single one of them showed up. My husband looked at the empty chairs and said they will regret this. 29 days later, my phone exploded with 199 missed calls. They found out who my husband really was, and it cost them everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. My name is Diana. I am 34 years old, and I work as a corporate restructuring consultant in Chicago. I spent my entire life trying to fix a relationship that was fundamentally bankrupt from the start. I stood in the center of the bridal suite at a sleek downtown Chicago venue. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city's skyline. It was exactly 45 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. My hair was perfectly styled in an elegant updo. I smoothed the heavy silk of my wedding dress. Everything should have felt perfect. But the room was entirely too quiet. There was no mother fussing over my veil. There were no aunts bringing me glasses of champagne to calm my nerves. The silence was heavy and suffocating. My phone rested on the marble vanity across the room. It buzzed once, breaking the stillness. I walked over, picking it up with carefully manicured fingers. The screen illuminated with a notification from a group chat titled Family First. I unlocked the screen expecting a message saying they were running late due to Chicago traffic. My parents had insisted they would be arriving directly from their hotel after a morning brunch. Instead, my heart completely stopped. The message was a photo from my mother, Barbara. It was a selfie taken in a brightly lit airport terminal. My mother was front and center, wearing a wide, joyful smile. Standing right behind her was my father, Thomas, holding 2 massive balloons, one pink and one blue. Gathered around them were several of my aunts and uncles, all beaming at the camera. The caption read, "Wheels up to LA. Brittany gender reveal is happening today. We could not let our golden girl do this alone." A cold numbness spread from my chest down to my fingertips. They were at an airport. They were flying to Los Angeles, which was 9 states away. Today was my wedding day. They had RSVP'd yes months ago. And instead of getting into a car and driving to my venue, they had packed their bags and boarded a flight to watch pink or blue confetti fall out of a cardboard box. Her gender reveal party had apparently taken priority over my wedding vows. Brittany had always been the golden child of our family. She was the aspiring influencer, the beauty queen, the one who always needed to be rescued. I was the reliable one, the quiet one, the one who was expected to handle my own problems silently while cheering loudly for every minor milestone Brittany achieved. I had spent thousands of dollars over the years bailing out my parents and helping fund Brittany's lavish lifestyle choices, believing that if I was generous enough, they would finally love me the way they loved her. I was wrong. My vision blurred with hot tears, but I refused to let them fall and ruin my makeup. I pressed the call button on my mother's contact name. The phone rang 3 times before she finally answered. The background noise of the airport terminal was deafening. I could hear boarding announcements echoing over the loudspeaker. "Diana, what is it?" Barbara answered, her voice dripping with wild annoyance. "I am in the middle of the security line and I cannot really hold the phone properly." "Mom," I whispered, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to stay strong. "Where are you? Are you really at the airport right now? You are supposed to be here in 45 minutes. I heard her sigh loudly, an exaggerated sound of profound irritation that I had heard 1,000 times before. "Diana, please do not do this right now. Brittany is highly stressed about the baby gender. Her blood pressure has been elevated and she really needs her family right now. You know how delicate her nerves are." I gripped the edge of the marble vanity so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Mom, I am getting married today. I am your daughter, and I am putting on my wedding dress right now. How can you leave me alone for a party?" Barbara scoffed, the sound sharp and cruel through the receiver. "Oh, do not be so dramatic, Diana. You are just signing a piece of paper with that glorified accountant you are marrying. Brittany is creating life. She needs us there to support her." I felt the air leave my lungs. I had given freely, asking for nothing in return, except perhaps the basic human decency of showing up for my wedding. The realization that their love was a transaction where I was always the one paying was a bitter pill to swallow. I felt the physical weight of their rejection pressing down on my shoulders, threatening to crush the joy out of what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The door to the bridal suite softly clicked open. I turned and saw Ian stepping into the room. He was fully dressed in his custom-tailored tuxedo, looking quietly powerful. He took one look at my face and knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. His dark eyes scanned my trembling hands and the tears in my eyes. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, closing the distance between us. Ian did not ask what was wrong. He did not offer empty platitudes. He gently reached out and took the phone from my shaking hands. He looked at the bright screen, reading the text message from the group chat, and seeing the photograph of my family smiling brightly as they abandoned me. I watched his jaw tighten. A dangerous, quiet energy radiated from him, an intensity I rarely saw. He set the phone down, face down, on the marble vanity. He reached out and gently wiped a single tear that had escaped down my cheek, being incredibly careful not to smudge my makeup. He took both of my hands in his, holding them with a firm, grounding pressure that immediately stopped my trembling. "We get married today," he said, his voice completely calm but carrying an absolute terrifying certainty. "Just us. And I promise you, Diana, they will regret this." Ian kissed my forehead and stepped out to take his place at the altar. I took a deep breath, smoothing my dress one final time. When the heavy oak doors of the ceremony hall swung open, the music swelled. I stepped forward, alone. Usually a bride walking without an escort draws sympathetic murmurs. Today, the silence in the room felt different. It was heavy with a profound, unspoken understanding. I looked down the aisle, and the visual contrast between the two sides of the room hit me like a physical force. On the right sat Ian's guests. The pews were packed with men and women in tailored suits and elegant dresses. These were not just friends. They were titans of industry, ruthless negotiators, and brilliant strategists who managed billions of dollars. Yet as I walked past them, they did not look at me with pity. They stood in unison, their expressions filled with absolute, genuine respect. Several of the senior partners gave me warm, encouraging smiles. Ian had clearly communicated to his inner circle that I was to be treated as royalty, and they delivered. They looked at me not as an abandoned daughter, but as an equal, as the formidable woman Ian had chosen to build his life with. Then I looked to the left. The front row was completely bare. 8 chairs sat agonizingly empty. They were perfectly arranged, perfectly draped in white silk, and perfectly void of the people who were supposed to occupy them. My parents, my sister, my aunts and uncles, they had all abandoned their designated places. The empty space felt like a black hole attempting to pull all the joy out of the room. I forced my eyes forward, locking onto Ian. He stood at the altar, looking at me with an intensity that anchored my soul to the floor. I did not look at the empty chairs again. I walked straight toward my future, leaving the ghosts of my past sitting in the front row. We spoke our vows in steady, clear voices. I promised to choose him every single day. He promised to shield me from anyone who tried to dim my light. When he slipped the ring onto my finger, the heavy gold band felt like a seal of protection. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and the applause that erupted from Ian's side of the room was deafening. It was not polite golf clapping. It was a roaring, standing ovation from 50 highly successful people who decided right then and there to fill the void my family left behind. The reception was held in a stunning ballroom overlooking the Chicago River. The lighting was low and elegant, casting a warm glow over the crystal centerpieces. For a few hours, I almost forgot the betrayal. Ian's colleagues went out of their way to make me feel celebrated. They toasted our success, asked about my corporate restructuring cases, and treated my career with a level of admiration my own parents had never once shown. I felt a strange sense of belonging among these powerful strangers. They respected competence and drive, 2 things my family had always treated as character flaws. We were sitting at the sweetheart table finishing our dinner when I felt a familiar vibration against my thigh. My phone was tucked into a hidden pocket of my gown. I pulled it out expecting a text from a vendor or a late congratulatory message. Instead, the lock screen was flooded with Instagram notifications. They were all tags from Brittany. I unlocked the screen and opened the app. Brittany had uploaded a massive carousel of photos and videos from her gender reveal party. She had not simply posted them. She had deliberately tagged my handle in every single image, ensuring I would receive a notification for each one. I tapped the first video. The setting was a sprawling rented mansion in the Hollywood Hills. The backyard was transformed into a carnival of excess. There were towering floral arches, professional lighting crews, and a massive stage. The camera panned to show my mother, Barbara, holding a crystal champagne flute, laughing uproariously. My father, Thomas, was standing on the stage, waving to a crowd of cheering guests. The next video showed the main event. Brittany and her husband, Kevin, stood in front of a giant custom-built prop box. They pulled a lever, and a literal explosion of pink confetti shot 60 feet into the air. It was not just a small popper. It was industrial-grade stadium confetti. Professional-grade fireworks ignited in the background. The sheer cost of the display was staggering. I work with numbers all day, and I could instantly calculate the price tag. The venue rental, the lighting, the catering, the pyrotechnics. This was a $50,000 party minimum. The caption on the post made my stomach turn. It read, "Welcoming our little princess." So incredibly blessed that my entire family flew across 9 states just to share this magical moment with me. Family is everything. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was making a public spectacle of the fact that they had chosen her party over my wedding. She wanted me to sit in my bridal gown and watch pink paper rain down on the people who should have been watching me walk down the aisle. I scrolled through the comments. Dozens of people were praising my parents for being so supportive. Not a single person mentioned that I was getting married on the exact same day. I had been completely erased from the family narrative. Ian leaned over, placing a warm hand on my bare shoulder. He saw the glowing screen. He saw the pink confetti. He saw my father cheering on the stage. He did not say a word. He just took my hand under the table and squeezed it, offering silent solidarity. I locked the phone and shoved it back into my pocket, determined to ignore the digital assault. We moved to the dance floor for our first dance. The band played a slow acoustic song that filled the ballroom. I rested my head against Ian's chest, letting the rhythm of his heartbeat steady my racing pulse. I closed my eyes, focusing entirely on the man holding me. He whispered that I was the most beautiful bride he had ever seen. For that brief moment, the hurt receded. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was safe. The band transitioned into a faster, upbeat song, and other couples joined us on the floor. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a quick moment to touch up my makeup and gather my thoughts. The bridal suite was quiet, providing a brief respite from the loud music and cheering guests. I walked over to the vanity and splashed cold water on my wrists. As I reached for a towel, my phone buzzed again. This time it was not an Instagram notification. It was a direct alert from my banking app. A high-priority alert. I frowned. I had set up strict notifications for any transactions over $5,000 on my personal and shared accounts. I unlocked the phone and opened the banking application. The screen loaded, displaying a transaction that had just been processed 2 minutes ago. A withdrawal of exactly $10,000 had been initiated and completed. I stared at the account name. It was the Family Emergency Medical Fund. 5 years ago, when my father Thomas had a minor heart scare, I set up a joint savings account. I was the sole contributor, depositing a portion of my bonus every year to ensure my parents would never have to worry about sudden medical bills or prescription costs. I gave Thomas joint access so he could use the funds immediately in case of an actual health crisis. Over the years, I had built the balance up to a comfortable safety net. I had explicitly told him it was only for emergencies. I clicked on the transaction details to see where the money had been routed. The transfer was not sent to a hospital. It was not sent to a pharmacy or a medical supply company. The routing number traced directly to an upscale event catering and design company based in Los Angeles. My mind raced connecting the dots. I opened Instagram again and went back to Brittany Page. I scrolled past the fireworks and the confetti until I found a photo I had glossed over earlier. It was a picture of the dessert table. In the center of the table stood a massive, intricate custom ice sculpture. It was carved to look like a baby carriage surrounded by swans, completely excessive and entirely unnecessary. The caption read, "Huge shout out to my amazing dad for surprising me with this gorgeous custom ice sculpture. You always know how to make a girl feel like a queen." The breath left my lungs in a sharp exhale. $10,000. My father had logged into a medical emergency account funded entirely by my hard work and transferred $10,000 to pay for a block of frozen water at a party he skipped my wedding to attend. He had stolen from me on my wedding day to fund my sister vanity project. The sheer audacity of the theft was paralyzing. It was not just the money. I made enough as a corporate consultant to cover the loss without missing a mortgage payment. It was the profound, absolute disrespect. They did not just abandon me. They actively used my resources to finance the very event they abandoned me for. I stood in front of the vanity mirror in my white gown. The sadness that had been sitting heavy in my chest all afternoon began to evaporate. The tears dried up. The lingering hope that maybe this was all a misunderstanding vanished completely. In its place, a cold, calculated clarity settled over my mind. I stepped back into the reception ballroom, finding Ian near the bar. I handed him my phone displaying the bank transfer and the photo of the ice sculpture. He read the screen, his eyes darkening. He looked up at me, ready to unleash his own brand of corporate ruin. I simply shook my head and took my phone back. I smiled a genuine, sharp smile. "Let them enjoy their pink confetti tonight," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Because on Monday, I am going to work." The crisp mountain air of Aspen should have been a sanctuary for us. Ian had booked a secluded luxury cabin for our mini-moon, aiming to give us a few days of absolute peace before returning to the corporate battlefield in Chicago. The massive stone fireplace cracked warmly, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a pristine view of snow-covered pines. It was Tuesday, exactly 3 days after I walked down the aisle alone. 3 days since my entire biological family chose a stunt with pink confetti over my wedding vows. I was sitting on the heavy leather sofa, with a mug of black coffee, feeling a strange new equilibrium taking root in my chest. The deep ache of abandonment had completely burned away, leaving behind a sharp, focused clarity. I was no longer the discarded daughter, hoping for crumbs of affection. I was a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. Ian was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, moving with that quiet confidence I loved so much. He had not pushed me to talk about my family since the reception. He simply provided a safe harbor waiting for me to dictate our next move. My phone, resting on the mahogany coffee table, vibrated with a sharp, harsh buzz. I looked at the screen. It was a text message from Barbara. My mother had not called to apologize. She had not sent a single message to ask how the ceremony went, or to offer any belated congratulations. For 3 entire days there had been absolute radio silence. Now her name flashed on the screen, demanding my immediate attention. I picked up the device and unlocked it. The message was staggering in its casual cruelty. It read, "Diana, we have a massive problem right now. Brittany went way over budget on her caterer for the gender reveal party. She wanted the imported seafood station, and the event planner is demanding final payment today. Since you did not have to feed us or the extended family at your little wedding this weekend, you obviously saved an absolute fortune on catering plates. Wire $15,000 to Brittany account by tonight to cover her difference. It is the absolute least you can do to make up for stressing her out and causing drama during her special weekend. We are waiting on the confirmation number." I stared at the glowing words, reading them twice to ensure I was not hallucinating the text. The sheer audacity was almost majestic to witness. My mother was not just ignoring the fact that she had boycotted my wedding. She was actively trying to penalize me for their absence. She had calculated the cost of the meals they did not eat at my reception and decided that money rightfully belonged to Brittany. In her mind, my wedding budget was simply a slush fund for my sister vanity projects. The implication that I was the one causing drama by simply getting married on a day they found inconvenient was a masterclass in psychological gaslighting. For a brief moment, the old Diana, the one conditioned to keep the peace at all costs, felt a familiar spike of anxiety. The urge to appease, to smooth things over, to buy their approval with a massive wire transfer tugged at my deeply ingrained muscle memory. But then I thought about the 8 empty chairs sitting in the front row of the ceremony hall. I thought about the $10,000 my father had stolen from the emergency medical fund while I was putting on my wedding dress. That account was something I built from scratch, sacrificing my own hard-earned bonuses to ensure my parents had a permanent safety net. They took that safety net to buy a giant swan ice sculpture. The old Diana was dead and permanently buried. I did not cry. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness or regret. I felt an exhilarating rush of power surging through my veins. I took a slow sip of my coffee, the dark roast tasting exceptionally good this morning. Ian walked into the living room carrying a plate of fresh fruit. He saw the cold, calculated look in my eyes and stopped in his tracks. He set the plate down and leaned against the sofa, his dark eyes studying my face intently. They made contact. He asked, his voice low and incredibly steady. I turned the phone screen toward him so he could read the ridiculous demand. Ian scanned the message, his jaw tightening visibly. A dark, dangerous amusement danced in his eyes as he finished reading the text. He did not ask what I was going to do. He knew exactly who he had married. He simply crossed his arms and waited for the show to begin. I pulled up the keyboard on my phone and began to type. I did not use exclamation points. I did not use angry capital letters or desperate emotional pleas. I used the exact same clinical tone I employed when dismantling fraudulent corporate ledgers in the boardroom. I am not funding my sister vanity project, I typed, my fingers flying across the smooth glass screen. And I want the $10,000 Dad stole from the medical emergency account returned to my bank by tomorrow morning. If the funds are not replaced immediately, I will proceed with formal legal action. I hit send. I did not block their phone numbers. I wanted to see the immediate fallout. I wanted to watch them scramble to respond. The response time was absolutely record-breaking. The 3 gray typing bubbles appeared instantly, indicating that my mother was frantically showing the screen to my father. Less than 30 seconds later, my phone vibrated again. This time the text message was from Thomas. He had completely taken over the communication, stripping away any remaining pretense of familial warmth. His message was a blunt force instrument designed to intimidate and control me completely. "You listen to me, you ungrateful brat," Thomas wrote furiously. "You will wire that $15,000 to your sister right now, and you will keep your mouth shut about the emergency account funds. That money belongs to this family, and I am the head of this family. You owe us for putting up with your selfish behavior your entire miserable life. You will pay the $15,000, or I will personally make sure you lose your job by Friday afternoon. I know the senior partners at your accounting firm. I play golf with the regional director every single month. I will call them today and expose your bad character and your absolute lack of loyalty to your own blood. We will see how arrogant you are when you are standing outside in the unemployment line." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. The sound echoed in the quiet wooden cabin, startling a small bird outside the window. Ian raised an eyebrow, a slow, proud smile spreading across his handsome face. "He just threatened to get me fired," I told Ian, tossing the mobile phone onto the soft leather sofa. "He says he knows the partners at my firm, and he is going to expose my bad character to them." Ian chuckled, shaking his head slowly. "He really thinks you are a junior spreadsheet clerk, does he not? He genuinely believes you are fetching hot coffee for the senior partners." I stood up and walked over to my leather travel bag, retrieving my silver work laptop. That was the absolute beauty of my family, profound, overwhelming ignorance. Because I never bragged, because I never flashed designer labels or demanded constant attention, they assumed I was a mid-level employee clinging to a mediocre corporate job. Thomas truly believed his suburban country club connections gave him the power to snap his fingers and end my entire career. He thought he was holding a royal flush in his hand. He had absolutely no idea he was playing at my table. I opened my laptop and powered it up. The encrypted security software loaded immediately, requiring my biometric scan and multiple complex passwords. I authenticated my credentials and securely accessed the highly classified internal servers of my firm. I navigated swiftly to the active audit directory. As a senior partner and the lead forensic auditor, I had unrestricted access to every corporate investigation our firm handled across the entire Midwest region. I scrolled down the long alphabetical list of active targets. There it was. An investigation initiated 2 weeks ago by a coalition of concerned shareholders and a highly suspicious corporate board. The target was a prominent commercial logistics and shipping company based out of Illinois. The company owned by my father Thomas. I clicked open the massive master file. The screen populated instantly with hundreds of flagged transactions, hidden offshore routing numbers, and deeply suspicious vendor payments. I had spent the last entire month building this case long before the wedding disaster, quietly pulling apart the financial illusion my father had constructed for decades. I had found dummy shell companies registered in my mother's name. I had traced phantom payroll expenses directly to Brittany's personal checking accounts. Thomas was right about one single thing. He did know the partners at my accounting firm. He just did not realize his own daughter was the most ruthless senior partner of them all. He thought he could use his corporate weight to crush me into submission, to force me to finance his golden child extravagant fake life. He did not know that his entire logistics company was currently sitting under my microscope, waiting for me to make the final fatal cut. I stared at the glowing laptop screen, watching the rows of fraudulent data illuminate my face in the dim cabin light. I smiled, a deeply satisfying and highly predatory smile. My father wanted to play hardball. He wanted to use my firm as a weapon to force me into silent obedience. I picked up my phone again and drafted a final response to his threat. I look forward to you calling the partners Dad. Please make sure you mention your daughter name clearly to them. I will see you in Chicago. I closed the laptop firmly and looked at Ian. He was watching me with a mixture of intense pride and unwavering support. The honeymoon was officially over. It was time to pack our bags and go back to the city. It was time to show my family exactly what happens when you try to ruin the woman who secretly holds all the keys to your survival. The transition from the pristine, snowy mountains of Aspen back to the unforgiving concrete and steel of downtown Chicago felt like waking up from a beautiful dream and stepping directly into a war zone. Ian and I arrived at our penthouse late Sunday evening. We unpacked in a comfortable, quiet rhythm. We did not discuss my family. We did not need to. The battle lines had been drawn the moment my mother demanded $15,000 for a caterer while ignoring my wedding entirely. Monday morning arrived with a sharp, blinding clarity. I stood in my massive walk-in closet selecting a tailored charcoal gray suit that felt like heavy corporate armor. I secured my hair in a severe knot at the nape of my neck. I applied a minimalist layer of makeup. The woman staring back at me in the mirror was not a grieving daughter. She was a weapon. I kissed Ian in the foyer of our penthouse and stepped into the private elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing my resolve. My corner office at the firm was a sanctuary of power. Floor-to-ceiling glass offered a panoramic view of the Chicago River, reflecting the early morning sunlight across my polished mahogany desk. I set my briefcase down and powered up my secure workstation. I bypassed the standard login screens, using biometric authentication to access the highly classified forensic audit servers. I pulled up the master file for Thomas Logistics Company. Over the past month, I had meticulously mapped every hidden offshore account, every phantom vendor, and every fraudulent payroll ledger my father had constructed. He had systematically embezzled millions from his own employees' pension fund to finance Brittany designer handbags and luxury vacations. The evidence was irrefutable. It was a federal crime sitting in a neatly color-coded spreadsheet. I was in the middle of cross-referencing a suspicious wire transfer to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands when my personal cell phone shattered the quiet of my office. The caller ID flashed Thomas' name in bold black letters. The timing was perfectly predictable. It was just after 9 in the morning on the West Coast. My parents would have finally dragged themselves out of bed in their luxury Hollywood hotel, recovering from their massive gender reveal hangover. They would have attempted to log into the family emergency medical account to pay the remaining caterer balance, only to discover they were completely locked out. I placed the phone flat on my desk and tapped the speaker button. I also activated the secure digital recording software on my secondary monitor. I always recorded hostile corporate interviews, and today my father was nothing more than a hostile target. "Diana, what the hell did you do?" Thomas roared. The sheer volume of his voice vibrated through the small speaker. He was practically panting with rage. I tried to transfer the remaining catering balance to the event planner, and the bank representative informed me my access was permanently revoked. "You unlock that account right this second and wire the $15,000 to your sister." I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, picking up a silver pen and twirling it between my fingers. "I told you, Dad, I am not funding Brittany Vanity Project. And I want the $10,000 you stole returned to my account by tomorrow morning. You had absolutely no right to touch a medical emergency fund to buy a custom ice sculpture." Thomas scoffed. It was a harsh, grating sound of pure, arrogant disbelief. "Stole? You actually think I stole from my own daughter? You have been a financial leech on this family since the day you were born. Do you have any idea how much you cost us growing up? We had to pay for your expensive braces instead of covering Brittany pageant entry fees when you were teenagers. You ruined her chances at a state title because your teeth were crooked. You owe this family for tolerating you all these years. You owe your sister for stealing her spotlight. You owe us your absolute unwavering compliance." The sheer delusion of his statement hung in the sterile air of my office. He genuinely believed that providing basic pediatric dental care was a lifelong debt I was legally required to repay by financing my adult sister luxury influencer lifestyle. He was attempting to weaponize a 30-year-old dental bill to justify robbing a medical fund. I stared at the spreadsheet on my monitor, showing the millions he had siphoned from working-class truck drivers. He was projecting his own parasitic nature directly onto me. "You are not going to disrespect us like this." Diana Thomas continued, his voice rising to a frantic, menacing pitch. "I am giving you one last chance to fix this situation before I take matters into my own hands. You will wire the money today, or I will personally make sure you lose your job. I know the senior partners at your accounting firm. I play golf with the regional director every single month at the country club. Do you honestly think they want a disloyal, ungrateful daughter working in their building?" I remained completely silent, letting his threats echo off the glass walls. My silence infuriated him more than any defensive argument ever could. Thomas operated under the profound assumption that I was a low-level drone. He firmly believed I was a mid-tier spreadsheet clerk who spent her days fetching hot coffee and organizing basic tax returns. He had no concept of my reality. He did not know that the executive office I was currently sitting in was twice the size of his entire corporate suite. He did not know that the regional director he played golf with answered directly to me on all compliance and audit issues. He thought he could use his pathetic suburban country club connections to crush my entire career. "You are just a glorified clerk, Diana." He spat out the words, trying to inflict maximum damage. "You are incredibly lucky they even give you health insurance. One phone call from me, and you will be packing up your little cubicle and standing in the unemployment line by Friday afternoon. I will expose your bad character and your absolute lack of loyalty to your own blood. No one will ever hire you again in this city." I took a slow sip of my black coffee. The dark roast tasted exceptionally good this morning. "Are you quite finished, Dad?" I asked, my voice dripping with clinical detachment. When you do not react to a narcissist, they inevitably escalate to their trump card. Thomas took a deep, ragged breath, attempting to lower his voice into a terrifying register. He wanted me to tremble. "You think I am bluffing, Diana? You think you are so secure in your little rented apartment with your average mediocre life? I have power and connections you cannot even begin to understand. I am having dinner tonight at the Chicago Cut Steakhouse with Marcus Sterling. I paused. The pen stopped twirling in my fingers. Thomas mistook my silence for fear and pressed his imaginary advantage. That is right. Marcus Sterling. He is the Vice President of Commercial Banking at Summit Global Partners. We are very close friends. We are practically brothers. I am going to sit down with Marcus tonight over a dry-aged ribeye, and I am going to have him pull your personal credit line. I am going to have him flag your mortgage applications and completely destroy your financial standing. You will not be able to buy a used car, let alone a house, when I am done with you. You crossed the wrong man today, Diana. I will ruin your life by dessert. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I looked away from the damning audit spreadsheet and stared out the window at the sprawling Chicago skyline. Marcus Sterling. Thomas was banking his entire grand revenge fantasy on Marcus Sterling. I knew Marcus very intimately. Marcus was indeed a highly competent and ambitious vice president who handled distressed commercial debt. He was a shark in a tailored suit. But more importantly, Marcus Sterling was a direct subordinate to the chief executive officer of Summit Global Partners. Marcus reported directly to a man who demanded absolute perfection, ruthless efficiency, and unwavering loyalty. Marcus had just been sitting in the third row on the right side of my wedding ceremony, holding a glass of scotch and cheering wildly when I said my vows. Marcus reported directly to my husband, Ian. The fact that Thomas thought he could leverage Ian's own loyal employee to destroy Ian's wife was a level of poetic irony I could never have scripted myself. Thomas was walking blindly into a slaughterhouse, completely convinced he was the butcher. I leaned closer to the speakerphone, my voice perfectly level and devastatingly calm. I hope you enjoy your steak dinner tonight, Dad. The dry-aged ribeye is excellent there. Please give Marcus my warmest regards when you see him. I ended the call before Thomas could utter another single syllable. I tapped the screen, stopping the digital recording, and saved the audio file securely into the primary evidence folder for his corporate audit. My father had just threatened me with financial ruin and career sabotage. He had handed me the final pieces of intent I needed to demonstrate his complete lack of ethical boundaries. I closed the evidence file and opened a blank email, drafting a quick message to Ian. I simply typed, "Thomas is having dinner with Marcus tonight. Let him talk." Ian replied less than a minute later with a single word, "Handled." I locked my computer screen, picked up my coffee, and went back to work, knowing my father sealed his fate. Ian sat behind a massive desk, crafted from a single solid slab of reclaimed walnut. His executive suite occupied the entire top floor of a sleek glass high-rise in the heart of the Chicago financial district, offering an unobstructed, breathtaking view of Lake Michigan. He did not work in a retail bank branch. He did not process checking accounts or sit in a cramped gray cubicle under flickering fluorescent lights. He was the founder and chief executive officer of Summit Global Partners. His firm specialized in acquiring distressed corporate debt, liquidating failing assets, and executing incredibly hostile corporate takeovers. He was an apex predator in the global financial ecosystem. His desk phone chimed with a soft, discreet tone that broke the intense silence of his office. His executive assistant spoke through the intercom, her voice laced with a hint of confusion. "Sir, there is a woman on line 2, demanding to speak with you immediately. She claims she is your sister-in-law, Brittany, and says it is an absolute family emergency that cannot wait another minute." Ian leaned back in his heavy leather chair. He looked at the highly classified digital file currently open on his secondary computer monitor. It was a comprehensive portfolio of distressed retail debt in the Los Angeles area. He tapped a single key on his keyboard, closing a spreadsheet, and picked up the receiver. "Hello, Brittany," Ian said, his voice maintaining its usual calm, perfectly professional cadence. "Ian, listen to me very carefully," Brittany started. Her voice lacked any of the fake sweetness she usually projected on her meticulously curated social media pages. She sounded frantic, rushed, and deeply irritated. "Diana is being completely unreasonable right now. I do not have the time or the patience to deal with her petty jealousy over my magical gender reveal party. She bluntly refused to wire the $15,000 I asked for, so I am coming directly to you. You are her husband now, so you need to step up, be a real man, and manage her. I am afraid Diana manages herself, Ian replied smoothly, his tone betraying absolutely zero emotion. And she already gave you her definitive answer regarding the outrageous catering bill. I do not care about the catering bill anymore. Brittany snapped, the genuine panic finally bleeding through her aggressive, arrogant tone. That was just pocket change to keep my event planner quiet for the weekend. I have a real financial situation right now, and since you are officially part of this family, you are going to fix it today. I need you to push through a massive commercial loan extension by the end of business hours. Ian picked up a silver pen, rolling it thoughtfully between his fingers. A commercial loan extension? For what exactly? For my luxury boutique. Ian Brittany huffed loudly into the receiver, acting as if she were explaining basic, elementary concepts to a slow child. My exclusive retail store in Los Angeles. The holiday season was a little slow, and the inventory costs were much higher than I originally projected. The bank is threatening to call in my primary loan. I sent the extension paperwork to your branch this morning. I know you are just a loan officer or a desk clerk or whatever it is you do there, but you need to log into the system and approve it right now. Ian did not correct her wildly inaccurate assumption. My branch does not typically handle retail boutique extensions, Brittany. What specific collateral did you list on this financial application? Brittany let out an exasperated sigh. I used Daddy Commercial Logistics Company as the primary collateral. He co-signed the original lease for me 2 years ago, so his corporate assets are automatically tied to my business accounts. Just run the paperwork through his company profile. He makes millions of dollars every single year. The bank will not even blink when they see his name on the guarantor line. Let me make sure I understand this situation correctly, Ian said, his tone remaining dangerously mild. You want me to illegally expedite a commercial loan extension for a failing retail store using your father's corporate logistics assets as collateral without going through any standard underwriting procedures. Do not use that condescending tone with me, Ian, Brittany sneered. Her voice grew shrill, echoing sharply off the glass walls of Ian's office. You are just a glorified accountant. You sit at a desk and crunch numbers all day for people who actually create things. My lifestyle brand is expanding rapidly. I am building an entire empire. I just need a temporary cash injection to cover the overhead until my new spring collection officially launches. Just stamp the paperwork, Ian. That is what bank drones do, right? You are drowning in massive debt, Brittany, Ian corrected gently, his voice devoid of any sympathy. Your boutique has not turned a single dollar of profit in 18 months. You are illegally leveraging your father employee pension funds to pay for imported marble display tables and celebrity social media marketing campaigns. There was a sharp, stunned silence on the other end of the line. Brittany's breath hitched audibly. How do you know about the imported marble tables? I never told Diana a single thing about the store daily finances. I look at complex numbers all day, Ian replied casually. It is my job to know exactly where the money goes. I do not care what you know, Brittany screamed, losing her temper completely. You are going to stamp that paperwork, Ian. You are going to push buttons and stamp forms. If you do not approve this extension by 5 o'clock today, I will personally call my father. He will have you fired from your pathetic little job before you even wake up tomorrow morning. Or I will have Daddy get you fired myself. Ian slowly turned his chair to look out over the sprawling city skyline. The sheer delusion of this entire family was a fascinating psychological study. They were so utterly blinded by their own unearned arrogance that they never bothered to look beneath the surface. They saw a quiet, reserved man who did not brag loudly about his immense wealth and immediately classified him as a subservient peasant. They had absolutely no idea they were standing right in the middle of his hunting ground. I cannot do that, Brittany, Ian said. His voice was no longer mild. It was cold, heavy, and absolute. I am not a loan officer. I do not process retail banking extensions. Then what exactly do you do? Ian, Brittany mocked viciously. Tell me what is so incredibly important that you cannot help your pregnant sister-in-law save her entire business. I do not issue loans, Ian stated softly, leaning closer to the phone. I buy them. When a business catastrophically fails, when someone exactly like you completely defaults on their massive financial obligations, the banks sell that toxic debt to me. I acquire the debt, I seize the collateral, and I completely liquidate the remaining assets to the highest bidder. You are lying, Brittany shouted. Her panic was rapidly escalating into pure, unadulterated hysteria. You are just a mid-level clerk. You are trying to scare me because Diana put you up to this. She is just bitter and angry because our parents will always love me more. She is punishing me for having a baby. I strongly suggest you start looking for a new retail space, Brittany. Ian continued, completely ignoring her emotional tantrum. And you might want to warn your father that his logistics company is no longer a viable financial shield for your endless spending habits. He is going to need every single liquid asset he has to survive the federal audit my wife is currently running on his firm. You cannot do this to me! Brittany sobbed, the aggressive anger suddenly turning into desperate, cloying manipulation. I am pregnant, Ian. I am creating a beautiful family. You are going to make me lose my gorgeous store. You are going to ruin my entire life over a stupid family argument. You ruined your own life the exact moment you decided to steal from your family to fund a giant lie, Ian replied smoothly. Summit Global Partners does not issue loan extensions to fraudulent failing enterprises. We acquire them and we dismantle them. Summit Global. Brittany repeated the name slowly, the realization finally hitting her like a physical blow to the stomach. You work for Summit Global. I own Summit Global, Ian corrected, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper. I built it from the ground up, and as of yesterday afternoon, my private equity firm successfully acquired the entire primary distressed debt portfolio from your commercial lender. There was a sharp, terrified intake of breath on the other end of the line. I am not your bank drone loan officer, Brittany, Ian said. I am your primary secured creditor, and I am officially calling in your massive loan right now. You are a complete monster! Brittany shrieked, her voice tearing painfully through the telephone receiver. I will destroy you. I will tell absolutely everyone what you did to a pregnant woman. I will go to the press. I will ruin your entire career by Friday afternoon. You hear me, Ian? I will absolutely end you. Ian calmly reached his hand forward and pressed the flashing red button to disconnect the call. The executive office instantly returned to a peaceful, highly productive silence. He looked back at his secondary computer monitor. The highly encrypted digital file displaying Brittany Luxury Boutique massive debt portfolio was still glowing on the screen. He smoothly moved his computer mouse, clicking the final digital authorization required to legally transfer the deed of the retail property directly into his holding company. The financial transaction completed instantly. The boutique no longer belonged to Brittany in any capacity. The prime Los Angeles retail space, the imported marble display tables, the expensive designer inventory, everything was now the exclusive legal property of Summit Global Partners. Ian picked up his cell phone and dialed his head of private corporate security. A gruff alert voice answered immediately on the first ring. Deploy a full team to Los Angeles immediately. Ian ordered, his tone crisp and entirely professional. Go directly to the retail address I just forwarded to your secure tablet. Change all the physical locks on the doors. Seize the remaining inventory and post a highly visible notice of immediate foreclosure on the front glass window. If anyone attempts to enter the premises, escort them away with extreme prejudice. Understood completely, sir, the security chief replied without hesitation. Ian ended the call. He stood up from his reclaimed walnut desk and sharply adjusted his suit jacket. His wife family had made a fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. They had publicly insulted his brilliant wife. They had blatantly stolen her hard-earned money. They had ignorantly attempted to leverage his own massive company to fund their pathetic delusions of grandeur. They honestly thought they were dealing with an accountant. They were about to learn exactly how a ruthless private equity firm dismantles a fraudulent life, brick by brick, until absolutely nothing remains but dust. Ian walked out of his office ready to join Diana in her righteous war. The trap was perfectly set, and the rapid countdown to their absolute total ruin had officially begun. By Wednesday morning, the shockwaves of Ian's strategic strike had firmly hit the West Coast. I was sitting at my desk in Chicago reviewing the initial risk assessment reports for my father logistics company when my office phone rang. It was Sarah, the managing director of human resources for our entire Midwest division. I answered immediately, expecting a routine question about a pending corporate hire. Instead, she asked if I had checked my professional social media accounts in the last 30 minutes. I told her I had been deep in financial ledgers and had not looked at my phone. She sighed heavily and suggested I open LinkedIn immediately because there was a situation developing online that required my undivided professional attention. I opened my web browser and navigated to the professional networking site. My notification icon was lit up with dozens of bright red alerts. I clicked on the Activity tab and found myself staring at a masterclass in digital character assassination. Barbara and Brittany had launched a coordinated, highly aggressive smear campaign against me. They had not just posted angry statuses on their private Facebook pages. They had taken their manufactured grievances directly to the professional arena, weaponizing LinkedIn in a desperate attempt to fulfill Brittany's promise to ruin my career. Brittany had authored a lengthy, highly emotional post detailing how her cruel, heartless sister had abandoned her family during a high-risk pregnancy. She attached a photo of herself looking visibly distressed in front of her luxury boutique, deliberately omitting the fact that the store was currently boarded up by my husband's private security team. The text of her post was a masterpiece of manipulative fiction. She claimed I was a bitter, unstable woman who had recently stolen $10,000 from a family medical fund to finance a lavish secret wedding. She completely inverted reality, projecting my father theft directly onto my shoulders. Barbara had immediately shared the post, adding her own vicious commentary. She tagged my accounting firm directly along with several senior partners whose names she had dug up from the company public directory. Barbara demanded that the firm terminate my employment immediately, stating that any company employing such a deceitful, financially unstable individual was putting their clients at massive risk. She urged her followers to share the post widely to expose my true nature to the Chicago financial community. They were actively trying to incite a corporate mob against me. I sat back in my leather chair, staring at the screen. My office door swung open, and three of my fellow senior partners walked in holding their tablets. Sarah from Human Resources was right behind them. For a brief second, a normal person might have felt a spike of panic. Instead, I looked at the group of highly paid forensic auditors and seasoned corporate strategists. David, the head of our international acquisitions department, broke the silence first. He looked at his tablet, then looked at me and let out a loud, booming laugh. "Diana," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. "I always knew your family was difficult, but this is genuinely the most hilarious thing I have read all quarter. Did your mother honestly just tag the managing partners of a global financial firm and demand we fire our own lead auditor over a fabricated family spat?" The entire room erupted into genuine raucous laughter. Sarah shook her head, setting a printed copy of the LinkedIn post on my desk. "They called our corporate hotline twice this morning, Diana. Your sister demanded to speak with the manager of the accounting department to report you for stealing her catering budget. I had to put her on hold just so I could compose myself. I transferred her to a dead extension, but she keeps calling back, threatening to go to the local news." I smiled, feeling a deep, satisfying warmth spread through my chest. The smear campaign had backfired spectacularly. My colleagues did not view me with suspicion or concern. They viewed my family as a complete joke. They knew my character. They knew my work ethic. More importantly, they knew my exact corporate rank. As a senior partner, I was essentially untouchable by external petty drama. I brought in millions of dollars in revenue for the firm every single year. The idea that I would be terminated because my sister threw a tantrum on the internet was completely absurd. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Sarah," I said, maintaining a professional tone despite my amusement. Please instruct the reception desk to forward all future calls from Barbara or Brittany directly to the legal department. I will handle the social media posts myself. I am initiating a formal cease and desist order this afternoon." My colleagues filed out of the office still chuckling about the audacity of the situation. Once the heavy glass door clicked shut, the amusement instantly faded from my mind. The smear campaign was a desperate distraction. It was a loud, messy attempt to throw me off balance because they were beginning to feel the walls closing in. Brittany had lost her boutique. Thomas had lost his $10,000 slush fund. They were lashing out like cornered animals. It was time to deliver the final lethal blow. I turned my attention back to my secure workstation, pulling up the master file for Thomas Logistics Company. The audit was nearing its final stages, and the sheer volume of financial irregularities I had uncovered was staggering. I had spent the morning tracing the origin of the funds Thomas had been using to float Brittany's failing lifestyle brand. The bank records clearly showed a massive, consistent flow of capital moving from the logistics company operating accounts directly into Brittany Los Angeles bank accounts. But something was bothering me. The logistics company was mid-sized and moderately successful, but it did not generate the kind of liquid cash required to sustain Brittany's astronomical overhead. She was burning through hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on commercial rent, imported inventory, and vanity marketing projects. Thomas could not possibly fund that level of spending from his standard corporate profits without bankrupting his own daily operations. The money had to be coming from somewhere else within the massive corporate structure. I ran a complex algorithm searching for hidden routing numbers in shadow accounts. I bypassed the primary operating ledgers and dug directly into the restricted human resources financial databases. I needed to see exactly how Thomas was moving money before it hit the tax records. I pulled up the employee benefit files, specifically targeting the corporate pension and retirement funds. The decryption software chewed through the data for several long minutes before the screen finally refreshed. I leaned closer to the high-resolution monitor, my breath catching in my throat. The numbers staring back at me were absolutely devastating. Thomas had not just been co-signing commercial loans for his golden child. He had not simply diverted a few corporate profits to pay for her extravagant parties. He had engaged in a systematic, highly coordinated embezzlement scheme that spanned multiple fiscal years. Over the past 4 years, my father had actively drained millions of dollars directly from his own employees' pension funds. He had taken the retirement savings of truck drivers, warehouse workers, and dispatchers, and quietly funneled that money into dummy shell corporations. Those shell corporations then issued completely fraudulent consulting fees directly to Brittany Luxury Boutique. He was stealing the future financial security of his loyal workforce to pay for his daughter designer clothes and celebrity social media campaigns. I ran a specific financial trace on the exact date of Brittany's lavish gender reveal party. The digital footprint was painfully clear. Exactly 3 days before the party, Thomas had initiated an emergency withdrawal from the Employee Pension Trust, classifying it as an administrative penalty fee. He transferred exactly $50,000 from the retirement accounts of working-class families straight to the Los Angeles event planner, who organized the pyrotechnics and the pink confetti cannons. My father was not just a narcissist who favored one child over another. He was a federal criminal. He had built a massive house of cards on the backs of innocent people who trusted him with their life savings. He thought he was powerful. He thought his country club connections made him completely invincible. He thought he could threaten to ruin my career because I refused to pay a $15,000 catering invoice. I sat back in my chair, my pulse thrumming with a dark, righteous energy. I highlighted the massive discrepancies and compiled the irrefutable evidence into a secure, encrypted dossier. The social media smear campaign meant absolutely nothing now. Barbara and Brittany could post whatever lies they wanted on the internet. They could scream into the digital void until they lost their voices. It would not save them from the utter destruction that was coming next. I picked up my office phone and dialed the direct extension for the managing partner of the entire firm. I did not ask for a meeting. I demanded one. I had the smoking gun firmly in my grasp, and I was ready to pull the trigger. Thomas had promised to expose my bad character by Friday. I was going to expose his massive federal crimes by Wednesday afternoon. I printed the final pages of the pension fund audit, the crisp white paper sliding out of the machine like a formal execution warrant. The game was officially over. The pristine glass revolving doors of the imposing downtown Chicago skyscraper swept Thomas from the biting wind into a soaring marble lobby. He adjusted the lapels of his expensive custom suit, projecting the unearned confidence of a man accustomed to blind obedience. He had caught the earliest possible first-class flight out of Los Angeles, fueled by a potent mixture of outrage and arrogant determination. His logistics company might be temporarily locked out of a minor emergency fund, but he was not about to let his ungrateful daughter dictate terms to him. In his mind, Diana was throwing a pathetic tantrum. She needed to be violently yanked back into line. He marched across the expansive lobby, his leather dress shoes clicking sharply against the polished stone floor. The directory on the digital screen indicated her accounting firm occupied the top 6 floors of the building. He bypassed the main security turnstiles and approached the primary corporate reception desk for the firm, which maintained a dedicated presence on the ground floor. Thomas felt a familiar surge of predatory excitement. He was about to demonstrate real power. He was going to terrify Diana into writing that $15,000 check for Brittany, and he was going to force her to hand over the additional $10,000 she had dared to demand from him. He expected her to come rushing down to the lobby, trembling and begging him not to destroy her miserable little career. He stopped at the massive curved desk carved from a single piece of dark granite. A young woman in a sharp blazer sat behind the terminal, typing quietly on a sleek keyboard. Thomas did not bother offering a polite greeting. He slammed his hand flat onto the stone surface, demanding immediate attention. The receptionist looked up, her expression perfectly neutral and highly professional. "Good afternoon, sir," the receptionist said. "How may I direct your inquiry today?" "I am not here for an inquiry," Thomas barked, leaning his heavy frame over the desk to physically intimidate her. "I am here to see the supervisor in charge of the forensic auditing department. You have a mid-level employee here named Diana. She is my daughter, and I need to speak with whoever manages her performance immediately." The receptionist did not flinch. She kept her hands resting lightly on her keyboard. "May I ask your name, sir? And do you have a scheduled appointment with management this afternoon?" "My name is Thomas." He snapped, his face reddening with immediate frustration. "I own a massive commercial logistics company. I do not need an appointment. I personally know the regional director of this entire firm. We play golf together at the country club every single month. You will pick up your phone right now and you will tell him I am standing in his lobby. Tell him I am here to report a severe disciplinary issue regarding one of his spreadsheet clerks." The receptionist tapped a few keys on her monitor. Her eyes scanned the screen, and her calm demeanor never wavered. "I apologize, Mr. Thomas, but the regional director is currently out of the country on corporate business. If you have a specific complaint regarding an employee, we have a formal grievance protocol you can follow online. I cannot simply pull a manager out of a meeting without a scheduled appointment." Thomas let out a loud, harsh laugh that echoed through the cavernous lobby. Several people in business attire waiting near the elevators turned to look at him. This was exactly what he wanted. He wanted an audience. He wanted to create a spectacle so massive and so humiliating that word would instantly travel upstairs to Diana. "You do not seem to understand how this works, young lady," Thomas said, projecting his voice so everyone in a 50-foot radius could hear him clearly. "I am not filling out an online form. My daughter Diana works in your accounting department, and she is a complete liability to this firm. I am here as a concerned citizen and a prominent business owner to warn your management about her terrible character. She is a thief." The receptionist maintained her steady gaze. "Sir, I must ask you to lower your voice. This is a professional environment." "I will not lower my voice," Thomas bellowed, taking a step back from the desk to ensure maximum visibility. "Your company is employing a financial parasite. She stole $10,000 from a family medical emergency account to fund a secret wedding. She is deceitful, ungrateful, and completely untrustworthy. If she is willing to steal from her own flesh and blood to finance her selfish lifestyle, imagine what she is doing to your corporate clients." Imagine the fraud she is committing on your company time. You need to fire her before she ruins your entire reputation. More people stopped walking. The busy lobby ground to a sudden halt as executives and corporate lawyers paused to witness the bizarre outburst. Thomas reveled in the attention. He was an absolute master at controlling the narrative. He was painting himself as the noble, concerned patriarch forced to publicly disown his criminal daughter for the greater good of the financial community. He mentally pictured Diana cowering in some tiny gray cubicle upstairs, hearing the whispers of her colleagues. He imagined her panicking, realizing that her father had actually flown across the country to execute his threat. She would come running down to the lobby any second now, tears streaming down her face, ready to transfer the $15,000 to Brittany just to make the public humiliation stop. "You are harboring a criminal!" Thomas shouted, gesturing wildly toward the ceiling. "I demand to see her immediate supervisor right now. I want her escorted out of this building today. If you do not bring a manager down here this instant, I will call the financial press and expose this entire firm for protecting a thief." The receptionist did not reach for the phone to call a mid-level manager. She did not look panicked or intimidated. She simply moved her hand to a small hidden panel beneath her desk and pressed a silent button. Then she looked back up at Thomas with an expression of polite, mild amusement. "Sir, you are making highly defamatory accusations in a public space," she stated clearly, her voice carrying effortlessly over his aggressive shouting. "I strongly suggest you reconsider your current course of action." "Do not tell me what to reconsider," Thomas snarled, pointing a thick finger directly at her face. "You fetch her boss right now. You tell them Thomas is here, and he is ready to drag his daughter out of this building by her ear if he has to." Out of the corner of his eye, Thomas noticed movement. Two large security guards dressed in immaculate dark suits were rapidly approaching the granite reception desk from the elevator bank. They moved with quiet, lethal efficiency, positioning themselves strategically on either side of Thomas. They did not grab him, but their sheer physical presence was a clear, undeniable warning. Thomas smirked. He assumed the guards were there to escort him upstairs to the executive suites, where he would finally get his private audience with the firm management. He straightened his tie, ready to deliver his killing blow to Diana Career. "It is about time," Thomas said, glancing at the security guards. "Take me up to the department head. I have a lot to say about the terrible hiring practices at this firm." The receptionist gave Thomas a look of pure, unadulterated pity. She rested her hands on the desk and leaned forward slightly. "I am not calling a department head for you, sir," the receptionist said, her voice perfectly smooth and devastatingly calm. "And you are certainly not going upstairs. These security officers are here to ensure you do not take another step into this facility." Thomas felt a sudden, sharp spike of confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I demanded to see Diana's supervisor. I want to speak to the person in charge of her employment." "She does not have one," the receptionist replied cleanly. Thomas froze. The words hung in the air, wrapping around his brain but refusing to properly register. He stared at the young woman behind the desk, trying to decipher the impossible sentence she had just delivered. He looked at the security guards standing like statues beside him and realized they were not there to escort him upstairs as a VIP guest, but to treat him like a hostile trespasser. "What did you just say to me about my own daughter, Thomas?" asked, his voice suddenly dropping to a harsh, dry whisper. "I said, Diana is no mid-level clerk, sir. She is the lead forensic auditor for this entire regional division." The receptionist smiled a cold, knowing smile that sent an unexpected shiver directly down his spine. "I will let the senior partner know you are here to see her." I stepped out of the executive glass office, the crisp white pages of the finalized audit report securely bound in a heavy red folder tucked firmly under my right arm. Beside me walked Arthur Sterling, the managing partner of our entire Chicago division. Arthur was a man who commanded absolute respect without ever needing to raise his voice. He had built his formidable reputation by dismantling corrupt hedge funds, exposing billion-dollar corporate frauds, and sending arrogant CEOs to federal prison. When I presented him with the irrefutable evidence of my father and his massive embezzlement schemes just moments ago, his expression had shifted from professional curiosity to predatory anticipation. He insisted on accompanying me down to the lobby. We moved toward the private glass elevator in perfect synchronization. The rapid descent to the ground floor took exactly 40 seconds. I used that brief window of time to slow my breathing and lock my emotions securely into an impenetrable vault. The old Diana, the eager daughter desperate for a single nod of paternal approval or a crumb of familial affection, was completely eradicated. I was stepping onto the battlefield not as a victim, but as a peer, a formidable corporate opponent holding the ultimate trump card. The elevator doors glided open with a soft melodic chime. The scene unfolding in the massive marble lobby was exactly as the receptionist had described over the phone. Thomas was pacing aggressively near the dark granite reception desk. His chest was puffed out, radiating suburban country club entitlement and raw, toxic fury. Two of our towering corporate security guards stood a few feet away, their faces completely impassive, tracking his every erratic movement. When Thomas saw me approach, his eyes lit up with malicious, gleeful triumph. He immediately zeroed in on Arthur walking beside me, completely misinterpreting the power dynamic of the situation. In my father and his warped, self-centered reality, Arthur was obviously the angry manager, dragging his insubordinate clerk down to the lobby for a highly public termination. Thomas practically vibrated with victory. He straightened his custom suit jacket, adjusted his silk tie, and took a bold step forward, eager to claim his perceived triumph and crush me into submission. "I see you finally decided to drag her out of her little cubicle," Thomas announced loudly, specifically aiming his booming voice so the passing executives and attorneys would hear every single word. His gaze bypassed me entirely, fixing squarely on Arthur with a look of conspiratorial male camaraderie. "I am Thomas. We have not been formally introduced, but I know your regional director quite well. We play golf. I apologize that you had to personally deal with this embarrassing human resources issue today. I came down here to warn your firm about my daughter. She has absolutely zero respect for authority, zero loyalty to her own family, and she is a complete financial liability to your company. You are making the exact right decision by terminating her immediately. She is a thief." I stood perfectly still, letting his unhinged rant wash over me. I did not cower. I did not avert my eyes. I stared directly into his flushed face, radiating total authority. Thomas hated my absolute lack of fear. It drove him to dig deeper, to pull out old rusted weapons he had used to subjugate me for decades. "You have always been completely selfish, Diana," he sneered, pointing a thick, accusatory finger directly at my face. He turned back to Arthur, desperate to build his pathetic case. "Tell your boss how you ruined your sister's high school graduation by selfishly ending up in the hospital with appendicitis. Tell him how you ruined her special day, crying about stomach pain just to steal the attention away from her diploma. She has a documented history of sabotaging this family. If she is willing to do that to her own pregnant sister, imagine what she is doing to your corporate clients. You need to throw her out on the street right now." The lobby was completely silent. The reception staff, the security guards, and the lingering corporate lawyers were all watching the spectacle unfold. Thomas stood tall, waiting for Arthur to agree with him, waiting for the final, crushing blow to my career. Arthur looked at Thomas. He did not look intimidated. He did not look respectful. The managing partner looked at Thomas in absolute disgust, his eyes narrowing as if he were studying a particularly repulsive insect that had crawled onto his pristine marble floor. Arthur slowly placed his hands in his pockets. "Mr. Thomas?" Arthur began, his voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "My name is Arthur Sterling. I am the managing partner of this entire firm, and you are operating under a catastrophic delusion." Thomas blinked, his confident smirk faltering slightly. "What are you talking about? I told you I know your regional director." Arthur stepped closer, his presence overwhelmingly dominant. "The regional director reports to me. And more importantly, he reports to the woman standing next to me. Diana is not a clerk. Diana is a senior partner here. She sits on the executive board of this entire division, and she is the lead auditor assigned to your corporate account. The blood drained from Thomas' face in a sudden violent rush. His jaw went slack. The arrogant suburban patriarch vanished, replaced instantly by a man realizing he had just walked barehanded into a minefield. His eyes darted from Arthur to me, frantically trying to process the massive magnitude of the power shift. He looked at my tailored charcoal suit, my unyielding posture, and the heavy red folder tucked under my arm. The realization hit him like a physical strike to the chest. He was not talking to a discarded daughter. He was staring directly at his financial executioner. I stepped forward, closing the final gap between us. I did not whisper. I spoke with total authority, my voice echoing crisply off the polished stone walls. I warned you to replace the medical emergency funds, Dad. I warned you not to play games with me. But you and Brittany decided to launch a ridiculous social media smear campaign and demand illegal bank favors from my husband. You forced my hand. I lifted the heavy red folder and dropped it onto the glass lobby table with a loud, resounding crack. The sharp sound made Thomas flinch physically. I found the $1.2 million you embezzled from your corporate pension to fund Brittany's boutique, I stated, enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. I tracked every single dummy shell corporation you registered in mom name. I traced every fraudulent consulting fee you wired to Los Angeles. I mapped the exact $50,000 wire transfer you pulled from your warehouse workers' retirement fund to pay for that ridiculous gender reveal party in California. The audit is completely finalized. The evidence is irrefutable. The IRS has already been notified. Thomas staggered back half a step. He reached out to grip the edge of the granite reception desk, his knuckles turning stark white. No, he gasped, his voice barely a breath. No, that is impossible. You do not have access to those files. Those accounts are heavily encrypted. I paid experts to hide those ledgers. They were encrypted to an amateur. I corrected smoothly, my eyes locked onto his terrified gaze. They were a minor inconvenience to a senior partner. You thought you held all the cards because you pay country club dues. You thought you could come into my building, scream at my staff, humiliate me, and force me to finance your golden child's fake lifestyle. You brought a golf club to a drone strike. Arthur checked his expensive platinum watch, his expression completely devoid of mercy. The federal authorities will be arriving at your logistics headquarters in approximately 45 minutes to seize your servers and freeze your operating accounts, Arthur added. I strongly suggest you use this time to contact a highly competent criminal defense attorney. You are going to need one before the sun goes down. Thomas looked like a man watching his entire universe collapse into ash. The power, the control, the lifelong narrative of his undeniable superiority. It was all gone, evaporated in the span of 3 short minutes. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic terror. "Diana, please," he stammered, the aggressive roaring completely gone, replaced by the pathetic whimper of a coward caught in a trap of his own making. "Diana, you cannot do this to your own family. We are your blood. I am your father. You have to stop this. I will give you the money back. I will give you the 15,000. I will give you 50,000. Just cancel the audit, please." I looked at the man who had spent 30 years making me feel completely worthless. I looked at the man who mocked my appendicitis, who stole from sick relatives, who tried to destroy my career simply because I refused to bow to his demands. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no lingering attachment. The slate was completely wiped clean. "I cannot cancel federal charges, Dad," I replied, my voice as cold as the aspen snow. "And I do not want your dirty money. I want you to face the exact consequences of your own massive arrogance. You told me failures do not belong in this family. You told me I would be standing in an unemployment line by Friday. It turns out you were just slightly off on the target." I turned to the 2 security guards who had been standing silently by the entire time. "Gentlemen, please escort this man out of our lobby. He is permanently banned from the premises. If he resists, call the local police." The The guards immediately stepped forward, flanking Thomas. "Sir, it is time to leave," the larger guard commanded, taking my father firmly by the arm. Thomas did not fight back. The fight had been completely drained out of him. He looked like a hollow, defeated shell as the guards marched him toward the revolving glass doors. He stumbled slightly, his expensive custom shoes dragging across the polished marble floor. He was thrust out into the biting Chicago wind, cast out of my fortress entirely alone and facing total ruin. I watched the glass doors spin, banishing him to the streets forever. Arthur placed a respectful, proud hand on my shoulder. "Excellent work, Diana," he said quietly. "The firm is incredibly lucky to have you leading this division." I picked up the heavy red folder from the glass table. I looked around the lobby at the reception staff and the lingering executives. They were no longer staring at a victim of a family dispute. They were looking at a titan who had just conquered her oldest demon. I turned to Arthur, a genuine, powerful smile touching my lips. "Let us go back upstairs, Arthur. We have a lot of work to do." The biting Chicago wind whipped viciously against Thomas as the heavy revolving doors deposited him onto the unforgiving concrete pavement. He stumbled forward, his expensive leather shoes scraping loudly against the curb, nearly sending him sprawling into the busy downtown street. For a fraction of a second, the sheer terror of Arthur Sterling and his devastating revelation completely paralyzed him. He stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring back through the thick glass of the corporate lobby. He saw Diana step into the private elevator, her posture perfectly straight, her expression utterly victorious. The sight of his discarded, ungrateful daughter ascending to the executive suites while he was thrown onto the street like a common vagrant triggered a violent, desperate pivot in his brain. The cold panic instantly morphed into a blinding white-hot rage. He marched aggressively back toward the glass doors, slamming his open palms against the thick pane. He screamed at the top of his lungs, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "You are bluffing, Diana!" he roared, his voice muffled by the heavy glass, but his intent perfectly clear. "You have absolutely nothing. You are a bitter liar, and I will destroy you forever. I will sue you for every single penny you claim to have. I will bury you and this entire firm in defamation lawsuits until you are begging me for a job." Two towering security guards immediately stepped forward from the inside, their hands resting on their utility belts, their eyes locked onto him with a clear, undeniable warning. Thomas pounded his heavy fist against the glass one last time, spitting a final curse before turning away. He stormed down the busy sidewalk, his broad shoulders heaving with every furious breath. He ignored the stares of passing pedestrians. In his mind, Diana was simply playing a high-stakes game of corporate poker. She had found a few irregular spreadsheets and decided to use them to scare him. There was absolutely no way she could have unraveled his entire ghost network of shell companies in a matter of days. He had paid top-tier financial fixers hundreds of thousands of dollars to bury those pension fund transfers. He was Thomas, a titan of regional logistics. He was completely untouchable by a mid-level accountant playing dress-up in a senior partner suit. He refused to be intimidated by her, but as he marched further down the chaotic downtown street, the cold air began to cool his blinding rage, allowing a terrifying clarity to seep into his thoughts. Arthur Sterling was not a man who played petty family games. Sterling was a legendary corporate executioner. If the managing partner of that firm was standing beside Diana supporting her claims, the threat was not a bluff. It was a guaranteed promise of destruction. Thomas slowed his pace, his chest tightening painfully as he reached into his tailored suit jacket for his phone. His hands were shaking so violently he nearly dropped the device onto the concrete. He unlocked the screen, intending to call his chief financial officer, but his notifications were already exploding. 3 missed calls from his corporate attorney. 7 urgent text messages from his vice president of operations. The most recent message glared back at him, the bright text confirming his absolute worst nightmare. "Federal agents are in the lobby. They are locking down the servers. The banks just froze the primary operating accounts. Call me immediately." Thomas stopped dead in his tracks, leaning heavily against the brick wall of a corner coffee shop. He could not breathe. The air was suddenly too thin. Diana had not just found the missing money, she had detonated a financial nuclear bomb directly over his entire empire. The federal authorities were already inside his headquarters. If they dug into the pension fund ledgers and traced the massive capital hemorrhage back to the dummy corporations, he was not just looking at bankruptcy. He was looking at a decade in a federal penitentiary. His mind raced frantically, calculating a way out of the collapsing inferno. He needed to plug the massive hole in the employee retirement fund immediately. If he could replace the $1.2 million before the board of directors caught wind of the missing capital, he could claim the transfers were a simple routing error, a temporary administrative mistake. But his personal accounts were deeply entangled with the corporate holdings. If the feds had frozen the primary ledgers, his personal liquidity was effectively reduced to zero. He had massive assets, sprawling warehouses, fleets of commercial trucks, but they were entirely illiquid and actively being seized. He needed raw, untraceable cash, and he needed it before the sun went down. Thomas closed his eyes, mapping his entire financial portfolio in seconds. There was only one major asset completely isolated from his corporate logistics structure: the commercial real estate property in Los Angeles. The lavish, sprawling building that housed Brittany and her high-end lifestyle boutique. He had purchased the building outright 3 years ago, placing the deed in a separate holding trust to protect it from corporate tax liabilities. The property was situated in a premium commercial district, easily worth $2 million on the open market. He did not have time to list it for a traditional sale, but he could absolutely leverage it. He could use the clean, unencumbered deed to secure a massive emergency hard money loan from a private lender. He could have $1 million wired to an offshore account by tomorrow morning, just enough capital to quietly replace the stolen pension funds and cover his tracks before the federal auditors cracked the final encryption layer. He dialed Brittany number 10, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The phone rang 5 times before she finally answered. Her voice was loud, cheerful, and completely oblivious to the catastrophic reality crashing down around them. Dad, Brittany whined playfully, the sound of pop music echoing. "You promised you would wire the extra $10,000 this morning. My event planner is threatening to cancel the floral arrangements for the baby shower. And I am not having a cheap-looking party just because Diana is throwing a tantrum over a catering bill." Thomas gripped the phone tightly, his knuckles turning white. "Shut up, Brittany," he snapped, his voice rough and laced with absolute panic. "Stop talking about the damn baby shower. We have a massive problem." Diana was not bluffing. She is a senior partner at her firm, and she just unleashed a federal audit on the logistics company. The feds are at the headquarters right now, seizing the servers. Brittany went completely silent on the other end of the line. The pop music suddenly sounded absurdly loud. "What are you talking about, Dad?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What do you mean the feds are there? I mean we are entirely out of time," Thomas growled, pacing back and forth in front of the brick wall. "The operating accounts are frozen, my personal accounts are locked. I need to replace the capital I moved into your boutique accounts immediately, or I am going to jail. You are going to be named as a co-conspirator. You need to leave the boutique right now. Go home, pack a bag, and do not speak to anyone. I am contacting a private lender. We are liquidating the boutique. I am putting the commercial property deed up as collateral for an emergency overnight loan. I will have the paperwork emailed to you in 10 minutes. You need to sign it electronically the second it hits your inbox. Do you understand me, Brittany? We are selling the building." There was a long, agonizing pause on the line. Thomas waited for his golden child to immediately comply, to rush to his aid, exactly as he had always rushed to hers. He expected her to panic, to cry, to apologize for demanding so much money, and to instantly sign away the building to save his life. Instead, a strange, breathless sound came through the speaker. It took Thomas a full 3 seconds to realize Brittany was laughing. It was not a cheerful laugh. It was a hollow, manic, utterly dismissive sound that sent a spike of pure ice directly into his veins. "Sell the building. Brittany asked, her voice dripping with extreme arrogance. You want to use the building to save yourself. You messed up the accounts, Dad, not me. Why should I lose my beautiful store? Thomas felt the blood rush to his face. Because I bought that building for you with stolen money, you ungrateful brat, he roared. If I go down, you go down. Brittany let out another sharp laugh. You cannot sell the building, Dad. I sold the debt and transferred the holding deed to a private equity firm yesterday to fund my baby shower. Some corporate acquisitions group out of Chicago. Summit Global Partners. Diana owned everything. Exactly 28 days had passed since the empty wedding. The dust had settled from the initial explosive confrontations, leaving behind a tense, suffocating silence across the family landscape. For nearly a month, Thomas and Brittany had been scrambling in the dark, desperately trying to untangle a financial web they lacked the intellect to understand. They were fighting a ghost. They had no idea the ghost was comfortably sitting in a leather chair, staring at a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my actual home, swirling a crystal glass of sparkling water. The estate was an architectural masterpiece tucked away behind heavy wrought iron gates and acres of dense ancient oaks in the most exclusive suburb of the city. It was an $8 million fortress of stone glass and manicured perfection. The sweeping driveway was lined with subtle security cameras. The interior boasted a temperature-controlled wine cellar, a private indoor lap pool, and a sweeping dual staircase that belonged in a cinematic masterpiece. It was a staggering contrast to the tiny, cramped two-bedroom condominium my parents always assumed I rented. For years, they had mocked my supposed living conditions, weaponizing my fictional poverty to elevate Brittany and her least luxury lifestyle. They genuinely believed I spent my evenings calculating grocery budgets in a galley kitchen. They had absolutely no concept of the empire Ian and I had built together. Ian walked into the expansive living room, his footsteps completely silent on the imported Brazilian hardwood floors. He was holding a sleek silver tablet, his eyes scanning lines of dense financial data. He wore a crisp, dark button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, projecting the relaxed confidence of an apex predator who had just cornered his prey. The final signatures have been authenticated, Ian said, his voice a low, smooth rumble that echoed perfectly in the cavernous room. Summit Global Partners officially owns them, Diana. Every single piece of paper is locked down. I turned away from the window and walked toward the massive marble kitchen island. Explain the exact mechanics to me, I said, setting my glass down on the cool stone. I want to know exactly how tightly the trap is shut. Ian placed the tablet on the counter, tapping the screen to bring up a complex web of corporate structures and debt obligations. He smiled, a sharp, predatory expression that always appeared when a hostile takeover was fully executed. Your father logistics company was already bleeding cash before you triggered the federal audit, Ian explained, leaning against the marble edge. When the IRS froze his primary operating accounts, his traditional lenders panicked. Commercial banks despise unpredictable liabilities. The moment Thomas missed his first emergency margin call, the banks immediately classified his corporate debt as toxic. They wanted to offload his outstanding loans instantly to avoid getting dragged into a messy federal embezzlement investigation. And Summit Global Partners was right there waiting with open arms, I noted, feeling a deep, powerful rush of satisfaction. Exactly, Ian nodded. My acquisitions team moved in quietly through a proxy buyer. We purchased the entirety of his distressed corporate debt for pennies on the dollar. Thomas no longer owes the bank, Diana. He owes my private equity firm. And because he is in breach of several fundamental covenants due to the IRS freeze, we hold the absolute legal right to demand immediate acceleration of the entire loan balance. I looked down at the tablet, tracing the digital lines connecting Thomas' failing company directly to my husband firm. Thomas had spent the last 4 weeks frantically trying to secure a hard money loan to replace the stolen pension funds before his board of directors realized what he had done. He had exhausted every single favor, every country club connection, every shady associate he knew. But no one was willing to lend millions of dollars to a man under active federal investigation. He was completely out of options. And what about my beloved sister, I asked. keeping my tone perfectly neutral. Ian let out a dark, genuinely amused laugh. Brittany is a masterclass in financial illiteracy. When Thomas demanded she liquidate her boutique to save him, she panicked. She wanted to throw a lavish baby shower and maintain her wealthy facade at all costs. Instead of selling the building, she went to a private broker looking for a fast cash injection against the equity of her brand. "I remember the broker," I said. We fed his contact information to one of her shallow socialite friends. The bait worked flawlessly, Ian confirmed. The broker was secretly working on behalf of Summit Global Partners. He offered Brittany a highly predatory, high-interest cash buyout for the debt of her boutique. She was so desperate for quick, liquid cash to pay her event planners that she did not even bother having a lawyer read the fine print. She signed over the primary lien on the commercial property and the operational rights to her brand. She basically handed me the keys to her entire existence for the price of a fancy party. "They walked right into the slaughterhouse," I whispered, staring at the glowing screen. "They ran into it," Ian corrected softly. We moved from the kitchen into Ian's expansive home office. The room was designed for serious high-level corporate warfare. 3 massive ultra-high-definition monitors dominated the custom mahogany desk. The screens displayed real-time market analytics, automated legal deployment systems, and the final foreclosure documents bearing the crest of Summit Global Partners. The digital clock on the primary monitor read 11:45. We were exactly 15 minutes away from the execution threshold. I stood behind Ian's chair, resting my hands lightly on his shoulders. The room was perfectly silent, save for the quiet hum of the powerful processors beneath the desk. For 28 days, Thomas and Brittany had lived in a state of suspended animation. They knew the federal audit was destroying the logistics company, but they still held on to a delusional shred of hope. Thomas believed he could legally outmaneuver the IRS. Brittany believed her boutique was safe because she had secured her quick cash. They were sleeping soundly in their respective beds, completely unaware that the ground beneath them had already collapsed. "Are the automated systems primed?" I asked, watching the green status bars pulsing on the center screen. "Everything is loaded into the secure server," Ian said, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. "The legal notices of asset seizure and immediate commercial foreclosure have been drafted, vetted by our internal counsel, and queued for electronic dispatch." I linked the deployment directly to the official corporate registry. I looked at the digital clock. 11:50. 10 minutes left until the illusion shattered completely. I thought about the countless family dinners where Thomas had loudly berated my career choices. I thought about the holidays where Brittany had flaunted her unearned wealth while mocking my practical lifestyle. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated arrogance it took for my father to steal the retirement funds of hard-working warehouse employees just to finance pink confetti cannons and designer handbags for his golden child. They had built a fragile paper castle on a foundation of theft and manipulation. They had expected me to be the quiet, obedient foundation stone that held it all together. When I refused, they tried to crush me. They tried to shame me into submission. They tried to destroy my professional reputation because I would not pay a catering invoice. The clock shifted to 11:55. "I want to know exactly what happens at midnight," I stated, needing to hear the absolute finality of the sequence. Ian leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together. "At exactly midnight, the server bypasses their standard communication filters. The system dispatches certified legal notices to Thomas' corporate email, his personal email, and the private inboxes of every single member of his board of directors. The notices officially inform them that Summit Global Partners has acquired their toxic debt and is initiating an immediate hostile seizure of all remaining corporate assets due to extreme breach of contract." "And Brittany?" I asked. "She receives a simultaneous notice," Ian replied smoothly. "A formal eviction mandate and a total brand seizure notification. She will be legally locked out of her boutique before she even wakes up. The building management has already been instructed to change the electronic access codes at exactly 12:01. 5 minutes remained. I walked around the desk and stood beside him, watching the seconds tick down in bright digital numbers. There was no hesitation in my mind. There was no lingering guilt. I had given them a chance to walk away. I had warned them to replace the stolen money. They chose war. They chose to strike at my firm. They chose to threaten my husband. They simply did not realize they were fighting a war they had already lost. The tension in the home office grew thick and heavy as the final 60 seconds approached. Ian reached out and took my hand, his grip warm and solidly reassuring. We watched the primary monitor together as the automated deployment system initiated its final countdown protocol. 10 seconds, 9, 8, 7. I thought about the receptionist in my lobby, staring down my father with total professionalism. I thought about Arthur Sterling delivering the crushing blow about my true corporate rank. 3, 2, 1. The digital clock struck midnight. The three massive monitors in the office flared with a sudden bright intensity. A rapid succession of green check marks cascaded down the center screen. The server emitted a soft, barely audible chime, indicating that the outbound firewall had been successfully breached. The execution logs populated instantly. Notice of immediate asset seizure delivered to Thomas. Notice of corporate default delivered to Logistics Company Board of Directors. Notice of commercial foreclosure delivered to Brittany. Brand transfer and lockout mandate delivered to Boutique Property Management. Ian let out a long, slow breath and tapped a final key on his board, officially locking the transaction ledgers. The electronic trap had completely snapped shut. Across the country, digital notifications were aggressively pinging on silent phones resting on expensive nightstands. The federal crimes, the massive embezzlement, the toxic debt, and the total loss of their manufactured empires were now legally binding realities. "It is done," Ian said, turning to look at me. "They own absolutely nothing." I stared at the green confirmation screens, feeling a profound, absolute stillness settle over my mind. The heavy red folder in my office had started the chain reaction, but this midnight deployment was the ultimate lethal finish. Thomas and Brittany would wake up to a world where their country club status, their stolen money, and their arrogant delusions had been completely incinerated. I squeezed Ian's hand, feeling the cool metal of my wedding band pressing against his skin. Tomorrow morning was going to be a masterpiece of complete destruction. Sunlight streamed through the massive glass panels of the master suite, casting long golden angles across the imported silk sheets. I opened my eyes, feeling entirely rested. The digital clock on the mahogany nightstand shifted quietly to 7 in the morning. It was exactly 28 days since I had stood in an empty church waiting for a family that had deliberately chosen to abandon me. Today the universe had fundamentally realigned. I stretched my arms, taking a deep breath of the crisp, temperature-controlled air. Ian was already awake. He stood by the window wearing a dark robe holding 2 steaming ceramic mugs of black coffee. He turned to me and handed over one of the mugs with a completely serene expression. His eyes flicked toward the nightstand. I followed his gaze. My smartphone was vibrating violently against the polished wood surface. The screen was a chaotic, flashing mosaic of red notifications. I set my coffee mug down and picked up the device. The sheer volume of digital hysteria was staggering. I had exactly 199 missed calls. They were neatly divided among 4 specific contacts: Thomas, Barbara, Brittany, Kevin. My father and his enablers had spent the entire night tearing themselves apart, trying to reach the daughter they had gleefully discarded just 4 weeks prior. I unlocked the screen and opened my message center. Dozens upon dozens of frantic texts clogged my inbox. I did not feel a single ounce of anxiety. I felt like a scientist observing a highly predictable chemical reaction in a controlled laboratory setting. The messages mapped a perfect psychological descent from arrogant demands to total unadulterated terror. The first wave of texts had arrived shortly after midnight when Ian's automated system deployed the digital execution notices. Thomas had initiated the barrage. At 12:15 in the morning, he had sent a furious demand. "Call me right now, Diana. Your accounting firm sent a glitch to my inbox. Fix it before I call Arthur Sterling and have you fired." 30 minutes later, the arrogance began to crack. Thomas realized it was not a glitch. He realized the notifications were legitimate, legally binding foreclosure mandates from Summit Global Partners. By 3 in the morning, Thomas had left 14 voicemails. His text messages shifted from commanding to frantic. Diana, please answer the phone. I cannot access the corporate servers. The security codes are locked. Call me. We can fix this. Then came the morning light. The digital trap manifested into physical reality. At exactly 7:15, the notification chimed. I opened the message from my father. It was written in pure, unfiltered panic. Answer the phone. The bank just seized my corporate accounts. Thomas had arrived at his sprawling logistics headquarters only to find federal agents and private security contractors guarding the doors. The massive commercial fleet was grounded. The warehouse bays were padlocked. The operating accounts were completely frozen. He was standing in the parking lot of the empire he had built, realizing he no longer owned a single brick of it. Kevin was next. Brittany's spineless husband had completely panicked the moment his own comfortable lifestyle was threatened. Kevin had always relied on my father money to fund his aspiring acting career. He had happily participated in my public humiliation, assuming Thomas would always be there to write the checks. His texts were a pathetic display of self-preservation. He started messaging me at 6 in the morning. Diana, I had nothing to do with the wedding boycott. Please do not drag me into this. Thomas is screaming at Brittany and she is having a meltdown. Please call off the lawyers. I am innocent here. I swiped past his cowardly pleas without a second thought. Kevin was collateral damage in a war he had enthusiastically cheered for. The true masterpiece of the morning was Brittany. My golden sister had spent her entire life shielded from consequence. She had stolen $15,000 of my money. She had stolen $100,000 of corporate pension funds. She had mockingly sold the debt of her luxury boutique just to throw a lavish baby shower. She truly believed her actions existed in a vacuum. She thought she could simply manipulate the world to fit her aesthetic needs, and someone else would always clean up the mess. Her text messages were a chaotic stream of consciousness. At 2 in the morning, she was angry. Dad says you are doing something illegal with my store. Stop it right now, Diana, or I am calling the police. By 5 in the morning, she was confused. Why is my business account locked? Why did my event planner just cancel my baby shower? You are ruining my life. Then reality crashed into Los Angeles. The sun rose on the West Coast, and the true nature of her catastrophic financial decision became undeniable. At exactly 8:30 in the morning, Chicago time, the notification flashed across my screen. I tapped the message from Brittany. It was the frantic, desperate scream of a spoiled child facing real-world consequences for the very first time. Diana. There are men in suits at my boutique changing the locks. Help me. I could picture the scene with absolute crystal clarity. Brittany would be standing on the trendy Los Angeles sidewalk, clutching her designer handbag, while a team of corporate liquidators systematically dismantled her store. The men in suits were operatives employed by Summit Global Partners. They had zero interest in her tears or her tantrums. They were simply executing a legally binding transfer of assets. Brittany had voluntarily signed away the rights to her brand for quick cash. The men were just changing the locks on a property she no longer owned. She was experiencing the ultimate public humiliation directly in front of her wealthy peers. I scrolled slowly through the messages, savoring the absolute destruction of their unearned confidence. I took a slow sip of my hot coffee. The rich, dark roast tasted like victory. Ian stood beside me, reading the messages over my shoulder. He did not say a word. He simply watched the empire he had dismantled burn to the ground. There was only one person missing from the digital panic. Barbara. My mother had remained completely silent throughout the night. She had always been the ultimate enabler, the master of burying her head in the sand and pretending her family was flawless. She had gleefully participated in my isolation, defending Thomas and his financial crimes while praising Brittany for her manufactured success. She had always chosen them over me. I stared at the screen, waiting. I knew Barbara would not remain silent forever. She was the matriarch of a collapsing house of cards. When the walls finally caved in, she would try to use her maternal authority to force me into submission. She would try to weaponize the concept of family to save her husband from federal prison and her daughter from public ruin. The phone vibrated in my palm. A new message arrived. It was from Barbara. I opened the text thread. Barbara had not sent an angry demand. She had not ordered me to fix the situation. She had done exactly what a desperate, terrified enabler does when they realize they have completely lost control. She had tried to figure out who was pulling the strings. My mother had finally looked past her own arrogant assumptions and done a simple internet search. The final message was a stark, glaring admission of absolute defeat. It was not a command. It was a plea. "Diana, please, we are family. Tell Ian to stop this. We Googled him. We didn't know he owned the bank." I stared at the glowing text on the screen. The sheer audacity of her statement was breathtaking. "We are family." Those 3 words were the most toxic weapon in Barbara's arsenal. She only invoked the concept of family when she needed something from me. When I was standing alone in a church waiting for my parents to walk me down the aisle, we were not family. When Thomas was stealing money from hardworking employees to fund Brittany lavish parties, we were not family. When they were actively trying to get me fired from my firm to cover up their crimes, we were not family. But now that Ian had systematically dismantled their wealth and exposed their fraud, they suddenly remembered our shared bloodline. They expected me to magically erase the consequences of their actions because of a biological connection they had never respected. They Googled him. The phrase echoed in my mind. For months they had dismissed Ian as a nobody. They had mocked his absence from their country club circles. They had assumed he was just some insignificant middle manager because he did not brag about his income or wear flashy designer logos. They had absolutely no idea that my husband was the apex predator of the corporate finance world. They had no idea that Summit Global Partners controlled billions of dollars in assets. They had no idea that Ian had the power to acquire their toxic debt and crush them with a single keystroke. They did not know he owned the bank. I looked up from the phone and met Ian's gaze. He raised a single eyebrow, a silent question hanging in the air. I handed him the device. He read Barbara's final desperate plea, and a cold, satisfied smile spread across his face. "It seems your mother has finally decided to do her research." Ian noted, his voice smooth and dangerously calm. "It is a bit late for due diligence." I took the phone back and locked the screen. The 199 missed calls and the frantic text messages were instantly silenced. I placed the device face down on the mahogany nightstand. I did not type a response. I did not offer reassurance. I did not demand an apology. Silence was the most devastating weapon I possessed. They had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, invisible, and utterly dependent on their approval. Now they were begging for my attention, and I was completely withholding it. They were trapped in a nightmare of their own creation, and I was going to let them experience every single agonizing second of it. I turned to Ian and picked up my coffee mug. The morning sun was rising higher, casting a brilliant light over our sprawling estate. The air in the room felt incredibly light and clean. "They have absolutely no idea what is coming next," I said, my voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of mercy. Ian stepped closer, wrapping his arm around my waist. "The financial execution is complete, Diana. Now we secure the future." I nodded, leaning into his embrace. The empty condo, the stolen money, the years of constant belittlement, it was all permanently erased. The golden child was locked out of her fraudulent life. The arrogant patriarch was facing a federal indictment. The enabling mother was trapped in a web of undeniable reality. The slate was completely wiped clean. I took a deep breath, savoring the absolute silence of my phone. The war they started was over. They had built their entire identity on a foundation of lies and entitlement. My total silence would be their final crushing punishment. I smiled, looking out the massive window at the beautiful manicured grounds of my true home. The future was finally mine to control. The phone on the nightstand vibrated once again, a harsh mechanical buzzing that threatened to disrupt the pristine tranquility of the master suite. I did not flinch. I did not reach for it. I simply let it dance across the polished mahogany surface until the incoming call timed out, leaving behind nothing but the heavy, definitive weight of my own silence. I turned my back on the device, dismissing the digital panic of the people who had spent a lifetime treating me like an expendable asset. I walked slowly toward the custom espresso machine nestled in our private morning bar. The soft grinding of premium coffee beans filled the room, a warm domestic sound that stood in stark contrast to the absolute devastation currently raining down on Thomas, Barbara, and Brittany. Ian watched me from the doorway, his arms folded loosely across his chest, a look of profound respect etched into his sharp features. I pulled a delicate ceramic mug from the shelf and positioned it under the chrome spout. The rich dark liquid poured out, filling the air with the comforting scent of roasted hazelnut. I picked up the mug and stepped back toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The morning sun was fully cresting over the horizon, now bathing the sprawling acres of our private estate in a brilliant golden light. Dew clung to the manicured lawns, and the ancient oak trees stood like silent sentinels guarding the perimeter of our fortress. It was a scene of absolute, unshakable peace. For 30 years, I had allowed their chaotic demands to dictate my emotional state. I had jumped at every aggressive text, scrambled to accommodate every unreasonable request, and internalized every cruel criticism. I had conditioned myself to believe that my worth was permanently tethered to their conditional approval. That era was officially dead. Pouring my coffee and watching the sunrise while their fraudulent empire burned to ash was the most liberating experience of my entire life. I took a slow, deliberate sip, feeling the heat radiate through my chest. My silence was not passive. It was an active, impenetrable wall. It was the ultimate boundary, and they were currently shattering their fists against it. The phone stopped buzzing, followed immediately by a sharp, singular chime indicating a new voicemail. I did not want to hear my father roaring threats, nor did I care to listen to my mother weaving a tapestry of manipulative guilt. But as I glanced at the screen, the automated transcription preview caught my eye. The message was not from Thomas or Barbara, it was from Kevin. My curiosity piqued just enough to warrant a listen. I tapped the screen and set the audio to speakerphone, placing the device on the marble counter. I wanted Ian to hear exactly what kind of cowards we were dealing with. Kevin's voice crackled through the speaker, high-pitched, breathless, and completely stripped of the smug arrogance he usually paraded at family gatherings. "Diana," he stammered, the sound of a closing door echoing in the background, implying he was hiding from his own wife to make the call. "Diana, please tell me you are listening to this. I know you hate Brittany right now, and I know Thomas treated you terribly, but you have to understand that I had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. You cannot let your husband destroy my credit. I have auditions. I have a commercial pilot shooting next month. I cannot have my name tied to a federal embezzlement scandal. Please, Diana, you have to spare me." Ian let out a low, amused scoff, walking over to pour his own cup of coffee. "The loyalty among thieves is always the first thing to evaporate," he noted smoothly. Kevin continued, his panic escalating into a frantic, breathless confession. "I will tell you everything you want to know. I will give you anything. You want to know what really happened with your wedding. I know why they abandoned you. It was not a medical emergency, Diana. Brittany faked the whole thing." I went completely still. The coffee mug hovered inches from my lips. My eyes locked onto the glowing speaker of the phone. "She was furious when you got engaged." Kevin spilled his words, rushing out in a desperate torrent of self-preservation. "She hated that the attention was finally on you. But when you refused to pay for her luxury lifestyle, when you cut off the money for her boutique and her ridiculous parties, she lost her mind. She engineered the entire hospital scare for the gender reveal party, specifically to pull your parents away from your wedding ceremony. She knew Thomas and Barbara would drop everything to cater to her manufactured stress. She bragged about it, Diana. She laughed about leaving you alone at the altar. She said you needed to be taught a lesson about who really runs the family. I told her it was cruel, but she would not listen. I was just a hostage in her scheme. Please, you have to believe me. Tell Ian to release my personal accounts. I will testify against Thomas if I have to. Just call me back." The voicemail ended with a pathetic, whimpering click. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the weight of Kevin's absolute betrayal of his wife and the devastating confirmation of exactly how far my family had been willing to go to break me. Brittany had not simply been selfish. She had been actively, maliciously vindictive. She had orchestrated the darkest, most humiliating day of my life purely out of petty jealousy and financial spite. And my parents, willfully blind to her manipulation, had played their parts perfectly, leaving their eldest daughter standing alone in a church while they coddled a tyrant. Any lingering microscopic fragment of familial guilt I might have subconsciously harbored was instantly incinerated. The slate was not just clean, it was scorched earth. I reached out and pressed the delete icon, wiping Kevin's cowardly, sniveling voice from the device forever. I looked up at Ian. His jaw was clenched tight, a muscle ticking in his cheek. He had always known they were monsters, but hearing the absolute confirmation of their calculated cruelty regarding our wedding day ignited a cold, dangerous fire in his eyes. "Do you want me to accelerate the personal asset seizures?" Ian asked, his voice dropping an octave, practically vibrating with the desire to inflict more damage. "I can have my legal team draft motions to freeze Kevin's individual holdings by noon." I shook my head, a slow, genuine smile touching my lips. "No," I replied softly. "Let them turn on each other. The money is gone. The status is gone. All they have left is a house full of resentment and a mountain of federal charges. Let Kevin and Brittany tear each other apart in the rubble. It is exactly what they deserve." Miles away in the heart of the city, the atmosphere inside Thomas' luxury SUV was thick with a toxic, suffocating panic. The silent treatment had driven them to the absolute brink of insanity. Thomas gripped the leather steering wheel with white knuckles, his face flushed a dangerous mottled red, his breathing ragged and uneven. In the passenger seat, Barbara was frantically scrolling through her phone, her perfectly manicured nails tapping aggressively against the glass screen, as she sent text after text into the digital void. In the back seat, Brittany was weeping hysterically, her mascara smeared down her cheeks, clutching her designer purse, as if it were a life preserver on a sinking ship. "She is blocking my calls!" Barbara shrieked, her voice cracking with unprecedented terror. The matriarch who had controlled every family narrative for 3 decades was completely powerless. "I have tried calling her from my phone, your phone, and the office lines. She is sending everything straight to voicemail." "She has to answer," Thomas roared, slamming his heavy fist against the steering wheel as he merged recklessly onto the expressway. "That bastard husband of hers just seized my entire logistics fleet. The feds are copying my hard drives. She is going to call him off right now, or I am going to break down her door and drag her to the bank myself. She owes us. We are her parents." They were operating on pure blind desperation. The realization that they could not bully, guilt, or manipulate Diana through a screen had forced them into a corner. They needed to see her face. They needed to stand in her living room, exert their physical dominance, and force her back into the obedient, subservient role they had designed for her. They needed to remind her that she was nothing without them. Thomas navigated the vehicle off the highway, exiting into a neighborhood that sat in stark contrast to their own sprawling suburban estates. The streets grew narrower, the buildings older and significantly more cramped. He was driving toward the address they had kept on file for years. The tiny run-down 2-bedroom condominium in a lower-middle-class district. The exact same apartment they had endlessly mocked at every family dinner, using her supposed poverty as the punchline to elevate their own grandeur. He pulled the heavy SUV sharply to the curb, parking illegally in front of a faded brick complex. Thomas threw the car into park and marched out into the morning air, his face set in a grim, violent mask of parental authority. Barbara and Brittany scrambled out behind him, their high heels clicking frantically on the uneven concrete sidewalk. They stormed through the main entrance, bypassing the call box entirely, and marched down the narrow, poorly lit corridor on the first floor. Thomas did not hesitate. He marched directly to Unit 1B, the number burned into his memory from the single time he had dropped her off years ago. He raised his fist and began pounding on the cheap wooden door with aggressive, heavy strikes that echoed loudly down the quiet hallway. "Diana," Thomas bellowed, his voice booming through the corridor. "Open this door right now! The games are over! Tell your husband to release my accounts before I call the police. Open the damn door. He pounded again, the hinges rattling under his brute force. Barbara stood right behind him, clutching her purse to her chest, ready to unleash a torrent of maternal guilt the second the door swung inward. The deadbolt clicked. The handle turned. Thomas puffed out his chest, ready to unleash his fury. The door swung open, but Diana was not standing on the other side. Instead, an elderly woman wearing a thick knitted cardigan and holding a steaming mug of tea stood in the doorway. She looked at the three frantic, enraged people standing on her welcome mat with a mixture of profound confusion and mild irritation. She adjusted her glasses, peering up at Thomas' towering frame. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her voice raspy and sharp. "If you are looking for the superintendent, he does not get in until 9. Thomas blinked, his aggressive posture faltering for a fraction of a second. "I am looking for Diana," he demanded, his voice thick with impatience. "Tell my daughter to come to the door right now. We know she is hiding in here." The elderly woman frowned, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. She looked from Thomas to the weeping Brittany, then back to Thomas, her irritation shifting into absolute bewilderment. "I have no idea who you are talking about," the woman stated flatly, her words slicing through the tense air like a physical blade. "Nobody named Diana lives here. I bought this place from a real estate holding company 5 years ago." Thomas went entirely rigid. The air in his lungs vanished. Barbara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated horror. They stared past the old woman into the tiny apartment, seeing unfamiliar furniture, unfamiliar pictures, and a life that had absolutely nothing to do with their daughter. The devastating, crushing reality finally washed over them in a paralyzing wave. They had absolutely no idea where Diana lived. They did not know who she really was. They did not know the man she had married. They had spent years mocking a ghost. They were standing on a dirty welcome mat at a cheap condo, fully realizing the catastrophic magnitude of their own ignorance at the exact moment their entire world came to an end. Thomas stood completely paralyzed in the dingy hallway. The elderly woman's door clicked shut, permanently sealing his humiliation. He turned to Barbara and Brittany, his massive chest heaving with frantic energy. He pulled out his expensive phone, his thick thumbs striking the screen. He bypassed his absolutely useless legal team and dialed a corporate investigator he kept on retainer. He screamed violent demands, ordering the man to tear through every property registry and hidden LLC in Illinois until he found Diana. He paced the worn carpet, barking aggressive threats. The seconds ticked by. Finally, the investigator promised the exact location within the hour. Thomas hung up. He ordered his wife and daughter back to the vehicle, refusing to speak as they marched out. The freezing rain began to fall heavily as they climbed into the luxury SUV. It escalated into a punishing downpour. Thomas drove wildly and recklessly through the slick Chicago streets, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. He swerved through morning traffic, his mind racing with impossible scenarios. 30 minutes later, his phone buzzed with an encrypted text message. The private investigator had delivered. He found a heavily shielded blind trust registered under a corporate proxy holding exactly one residential asset. Thomas snatched the phone and punched the exact coordinates into the navigation system. The glowing digital map immediately directed them away from the chaotic city blocks and deep into the exclusive, affluent enclaves of the northern suburbs. The roads gradually grew much wider, the massive private properties set further back behind towering stone walls and dense forests. Brittany sat frozen in the back seat, her tears replaced by a sickening confusion. Barbara stared out the wet window, her hand clutching her pearl necklace. This was clearly not a cheap neighborhood for struggling accountants. This was a pristine sanctuary, exclusively reserved for billionaires. The heavy SUV tires hissed loudly against the wet asphalt as Thomas followed the curving roads. Every single passing mile violently eroded their lifelong narrative of Diana and her supposed financial failures. The navigation system softly announced their arrival. Thomas slammed the brakes, the heavy vehicle skidding slightly before coming to a complete stop. They were staring directly at a set of towering, imposing wrought iron gates anchored by massive pillars of dark stone. Beyond the heavy gates, a long, winding driveway composed of imported cobblestone disappeared entirely into a dense canopy of perfectly maintained oak trees. High-tech security cameras tracked the SUV, instantly monitoring their every move. Thomas forcefully killed the engine. The only sound inside the car was the relentless drumming of the freezing rain against the metal roof. Barbara pressed her pale face against the cold glass. Her panicked breath fogged the pain as she tried to comprehend the sheer scale of the property. This was not merely a house. It was an absolute, impenetrable fortress. It was a sprawling estate that completely dwarfed even the most lavish homes in their own pretentious country club circle. Brittany leaned forward, her manicured hands gripping the leather headrest with a white-knuckled intensity. Her eyes darted frantically over the impenetrable iron gates and the sprawling grounds hidden beyond them. Her boutique, her entire manufactured identity of superiority, suddenly felt incredibly small and utterly pathetic. For 30 long years, they had actively convinced themselves that Diana was a struggling clerk. They had mocked her practical car, ridiculed her unbranded suits, and genuinely believed she was desperate for their financial approval and parental validation. Staring blindly at the towering gates of an $8 million compound, their collective delusion shattered into a million jagged pieces. Diana had not been hiding from them out of shame. She had been existing in a glorious stratosphere of immense wealth and untouchable power they could not even fathom. She had built a monumental financial empire entirely in the shadows, completely independent of Thomas and his controlling money. The sheer magnitude of her success was a devastating physical blow to their massive egos. Thomas aggressively shoved his door open, stepping out into the freezing torrential rain. He did not bother grabbing an umbrella. His expensive custom suit was instantly soaked, the dark fabric clinging tightly to his broad shoulders. He marched furiously toward the heavy stone pillar housing the advanced security intercom. Barbara and Brittany scrambled out of the vehicle a moment later, shivering violently as the biting Chicago wind whipped the heavy rain directly across their pale faces. Thomas slammed his thumb against the silver call button. The polished metal panel hummed with a sharp electronic tone. Diana Thomas roared into the speaker, his booming voice competing with the sound of the violent storm. "Diana, open these gates right now. I know you are in there. You are going to call off your husband and restore my corporate accounts this exact second. Do you hear me now?" Only the static hiss of the intercom answered him. He hit the button again, his wet face twisting with a furious, impotent rage. He was a man deeply used to kicking down doors and terrorizing his loyal subordinates. He currently had absolutely no power against 10 feet of solid iron and a sophisticated digital lock. Barbara forcefully pushed Thomas aside, her perfectly styled blonde hair flattening instantly against her scalp, her expensive mascara running down her flushed cheeks in dark rivers. She pressed both trembling hands against the cold stone pillar, leaning extremely close to the speaker. The arrogant matriarch completely vanished instantly, replaced by a desperate, groveling woman attempting to weaponize the very concept of family she had spent decades actively destroying. Barbara begged through the security intercom. "Diana, it is raining out here. Please let your pregnant sister inside. We are about to lose everything." A long, slow, agonizing minute passed. The heavy rain continued to batter them completely mercilessly. Thomas stood shivering uncontrollably, his thick fists clenched tightly. Brittany wrapped her arms tightly around her stomach, sobbing loudly, utterly terrified of the total financial ruin waiting for her back in Los Angeles. Barbara pressed her wet forehead against the freezing stone, her chest heaving with dramatic sobs. Then a heavy mechanical click loudly echoed through the driving storm. The massive wrought iron gates slowly opened, silently gliding backward on their hidden tracks. The electronic locking mechanism hummed quietly, finally granting them access to the highly restricted inner sanctum. Thomas did not wait a single second. He practically shoved Barbara toward the waiting SUV, sprinting frantically back to the driver's side door. They climbed hastily into the vehicle, bringing the damp chill of the violent storm inside with them. Thomas aggressively threw the car into drive and immediately accelerated up the slick cobblestone path. They drive up the long, manicured driveway, intimidated by the scale of success Diana built entirely without them. The path seemed to stretch forever, flanked by landscaping that looked pristine in the downpour. As they rounded the curve through the oaks, the main estate revealed itself. It was a breathtaking marvel of glass, dark steel, and natural stone. The floor-to-ceiling windows glowed with warm light, showcasing the staggering luxury within. Thomas parked the wet SUV near the grand entrance next to a sleek matte black sports car that cost more than his entire first warehouse. The stark visual contrast between his frantic arrival and the unbothered serenity of the estate crushed the last fragments of his shattered confidence. They were not arriving as commanding authorities. They were arriving as defeated beggars crawling to the steps of an untouchable monarch. Thomas stepped hesitantly out of the vehicle, his wet shoes slapping against the smooth slate of the covered portico. Barbara and Brittany followed closely behind him, shivering violently and looking around with wide, terrified eyes. The heavy custom oak front door swung open before Thomas could even raise his hand to knock. Diana stood confidently in the threshold. She was wearing perfectly tailored dark trousers and a simple cashmere sweater. She held a steaming mug of hot coffee, looking completely relaxed, flawless, and untouched by the chaos currently drowning her miserable family. Standing right beside her was Ian. He wore a crisp, dark dress shirt, his rigid posture radiating the absolute lethal authority of a man who controlled billions of dollars in global assets. He looked down at the three soaking, shivering figures standing on his pristine doorstep with an expression of total apathetic boredom. Thomas stared at Ian, his fractured mind trying to process the colossal power shift. He ignored Diana, reverting instantly to his pathetic, misogynistic belief that men controlled the real power in any room. He puffed out his wet chest, attempting to project a hollow aura of corporate dominance. Thomas attempts to use his fatherly authority on Ian, saying, "Leo, son, let us talk business man to man. You cannot foreclose on your own family." Ian does not even look at Thomas. He looks at Diana and says, "My business is with Summit Global. My wife handles the family matters." Thomas' jaw slackened. The patriarchal illusion he had clung to for decades dissolved into the freezing rain. He had nothing left to say. The silence stretching across the portico was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the storm against the slate tiles. Then Brittany shoved her way past Barbara. She marched forward, her soaking wet designer shoes sliding dangerously on the wet stone, her hands dramatically framing her slightly swollen stomach. She was reverting to the only tactic she had ever known, weaponizing her victimhood. "Diana, you cannot do this to me!" Brittany screamed, her voice shrill and entirely devoid of genuine remorse. "You are making your own future niece homeless. You are destroying my entire life simply because you are bitter about one stupid wedding. You always hated me because Dad loved me more. You are using your rich husband to bully us because you are jealous. You are a petty, vindictive monster." Barbara immediately stepped up right behind her golden child, nodding vigorously, her hands clasped together in a desperate prayer. "Please, Diana, your sister is under extreme medical stress. She needs her boutique. She needs her income. You cannot throw your own family onto the street over hurt feelings. Be the bigger person. We can fix this if you just give us a chance to breathe." I did not raise my voice. I did not match their hysterical pitch. I stepped forward, closing the distance until I was standing inches away from my trembling sister. My voice was dangerously calm, cutting through the heavy rain with lethal precision. "I do not care about the wedding." "Brittany," I stated flatly, staring directly into her terrified eyes. "I do not care that you manufactured a fake medical emergency to steal the spotlight. I do not care that you manipulated our parents into abandoning me at the altar. That wedding simply showed me exactly who you all are. But that is not why you are losing your boutique." I reached into the pocket of my trousers and pulled out a thick, folded document. It was not a civil lawsuit. It was printed on heavy official stock bearing the distinct, intimidating seal of the federal government. I held it out in the cold air. Thomas stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. "You are not losing everything because of me." I continued enunciating every single syllable with absolute clarity. "You are losing everything because you are criminals." I shoved the document hard against Thomas' chest. He instinctively grabbed it, his hands shaking violently as he unfolded the pages. His eyes darted across the bold black text, taking in the official charges. "I care that you stole from hardworking warehouse employees to fund a fake luxury lifestyle," I said, my voice echoing off the stone walls of the portico. "I care that you liquidated the retirement accounts of men and women who trusted you just to pay for pink confetti cannons, designer handbags, and leased luxury cars. You committed massive federal wire fraud, Thomas. You embezzled over $1 million. And you, Brittany, willingly signed the receipt for stolen funds. The document you are holding is a copy of the official federal indictment." Thomas' face drained of all color. He looked exactly like a dead man standing upright. The paper slipped from his trembling fingers, fluttering to the wet stone floor. He knew it was over. There was no spinning a federal indictment. There was no bullying an auditor. The empire was gone, and he was going to federal prison. Brittany stared at the fallen paper, the reality of her situation finally penetrating her thick skull. Her golden child status had absolutely zero currency here. Her tears, her complaints, her manufactured drama meant nothing to the federal government. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. She let out a guttural, piercing scream. She collapsed onto her knees right there on the hard, wet concrete of my portico. She began thrashing wildly, slapping her hands against the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. "No," she wailed, her voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate shriek. "No, I am not going to jail. I did not do anything wrong. Dad gave me the money. It is his fault. It is all his fault. Make it stop, Diana." She was throwing a full-blown toddler tantrum on the concrete, completely abandoning any remaining shred of dignity. Barbara dropped to her knees beside her, sobbing loudly, trying to wrap her arms around her flailing daughter. Thomas just stood there, staring blankly into the driving rain, completely paralyzed by his impending destruction. Ian calmly raised his hand. Two massive private security contractors instantly materialized from the shadows of the main house. They moved with silent professional efficiency, their expressions completely stony. "Escort them off the property," Ian commanded, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "If they resist, call the local authorities and have them arrested for trespassing." The guard stepped forward, hauling a hysterical Brittany to her feet by her arms. They physically guided the weeping women and the catatonic Thomas back toward their soaked luxury SUV. I stood on my porch, watching the vehicle start up and slowly retreat down the long cobblestone driveway. The heavy iron gates swung shut behind them with a definitive metallic clang, locking them out of my world forever. The ensuing weeks delivered a masterclass in absolute unavoidable natural consequences. The dominoes fell with brutal, sequential precision. The board of directors at the logistics company held an emergency vote less than 48 hours after the federal raid. Thomas was unanimously ousted as chief executive officer and immediately stripped of his corporate protections and benefits. 3 days later, he was formally indicted on multiple counts of federal embezzlement and wire fraud. His personal assets were completely frozen, and he was forced to surrender his passport. Brittany fared no better. Summit Global Partners executed the commercial foreclosure with ruthless, unforgiving speed. Her trendy Los Angeles boutique was immediately shuttered and heavily padlocked by corporate liquidators. The liquidation of her inventory barely covered the massive penalties she had accumulated. Her fraudulent empire evaporated overnight. Kevin, realizing the gravy train had permanently derailed and terrified of being implicated in the federal probe, instantly filed for divorce. To ensure his own public survival, Kevin took to social media. He viciously exposed Brittany's fake wealth online, posting screenshots of her maxed-out credit cards and detailing exactly how she had faked her medical emergency. She became a viral laughingstock, permanently exiled from the superficial social circles she worshipped. With their primary residence seized by the bank to cover outstanding corporate debts, Thomas faced his criminal trial from a bleak holding cell. Barbara, completely stripped of her country club memberships and her massive household budget, was forced to move into a tiny, cramped, deeply unglamorous apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. She ended up sharing the miserable space with the disgraced, perpetually angry Brittany. They were finally forced to live the exact impoverished lifestyle they had spent decades falsely projecting onto me. As for the Los Angeles property that Summit Global Partners had seized, Ian offered to sell the prime commercial real estate and transfer the liquid funds directly into my personal accounts. I firmly declined. I had a much better, much more poetic vision for Brittany's former kingdom of vanity. I flew to California to oversee the total demolition of her boutique. I stripped out the pink velvet walls, the champagne bars, and the arrogant luxury displays. I hired a brilliant team of architects to completely gut the building from the inside out. We did not sell the space. Instead, Summit Global Partners converted the $2 million property into a free financial literacy and business planning center for underprivileged young women. We provided robust grants, free legal counsel, and practical business education to women who actually wanted to build real, sustainable futures. I took the ultimate monument to my sister's pure narcissism and transformed it into a powerful engine of genuine empowerment. It was the perfect erasure of everything she stood for. Months later, the brutal Chicago winter gave way to the crisp, colorful beauty of late autumn. The sprawling dining room of our estate was filled with the rich, savory scents of roasted turkey, fresh herbs, and warm spices. A massive fire crackled cheerfully in the stone hearth, casting a beautiful golden glow over the long wooden table. It was Thanksgiving. The estate was packed with vibrant life, loud laughter, and genuine warmth. I looked down the length of the long table. Ian was pouring an expensive vintage of wine for Arthur Sterling, who had transitioned from my boss to a close mentor and trusted personal friend. My incredible team of forensic accountants from the firm sat clustered near the center, loudly debating market trends while passing heavy plates of food. There were no underlying tensions in the room. There were no manipulative digs disguised as family jokes. There was no golden child demanding the constant spotlight. This was my chosen family, a tight circle of brilliant, loyal individuals built entirely on mutual respect and shared earned success. I felt a slight vibration in the pocket of my dress. I pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated, displaying a new text message from an unknown number. I knew exactly who it was. Barbara and Brittany had been desperately attempting to reach me from various prepaid burner phones for weeks, begging for financial assistance as their meager savings dwindled to absolutely nothing. I did not even bother reading the preview text. I opened my device settings, navigated to the contact controls, and permanently blocked the number. I dropped the phone back into my pocket, the heavy, dark anchor of my biological family, completely, permanently severed. I picked up my wine glass, a profound, unburdened smile breaking across my face as I turned back to the people who truly mattered. The noise of the joyful, crowded room swelled around me, bright and triumphant, as the shadows of the past finally faded to black.